I've always been a person who trusts what they see. Maybe that's why I took to climbing the way I did. It's a sport of absolutes. The rock is solid, the gear holds, the fall is real. There's no room for doubt when you're hundreds of feet up, clinging to a sheer face. I was 28 then, lean and tough, with 10 years of scaling everything from small local bluffs to proper mountain peaks under my belt. Living just outside of Asheville, North Carolina, meant I had some of the best climbing in the East right in my backyard. It was my escape, my meditation, my life. This particular story, though, this one still makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck. It changed everything I thought I knew about solid ground, about what's real. It started like any other late autumn trip. The leaves were past their peak, but the air was crisp, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue, perfect climbing weather. My regular partner, Mark, was out of town visiting family, so I decided to head out alone. I know. Rule number 1, never climb alone, especially not in a remote area. It was a mistake, a lapse in judgment born of overconfidence and a burning need to be on the rock. Looking back, I can see how that vulnerability, that sense of isolated self-reliance, was exactly what set the stage for everything that followed. I packed light, a single rope, a rack of cams and nuts, chalk bag, water, and some snacks. My destination was a lesser-known spot I'd scouted a few months prior, a section of the Pisgah National Forest where an old quarry road eventually petered out into a tangle of thick rhododendron, and then after a good hour's hike, opened up to a series of impressive granite faces. Most climbers stuck to the popular spots. This one, though, offered a particular challenge, a section of sheer rock about 150 feet high with a tricky overhang near the top. I'd named it the Sentinel in my head. It wasn't a climb for beginners and certainly not one for solo runs. The drive was long, the gravel road rattling my old pickup. By the time I parked, the sun was already starting its slow descent, painting the western sky in fiery oranges and purples. I strapped on my pack, checked my watch, 2:30 p.m. I figured I had a good 3, maybe 4 hours of daylight left if I moved quickly. Enough for one solid ascent and rappel before hiking back to the truck in the twilight. The trail to the Sentinel was overgrown, the way indistinct. I'd marked a few trees with inconspicuous blazes on my last visit, but even those were fading. The woods here had a different feel than the more trafficked parts of the park. It was quieter, deeper, the kind of quiet where your own footsteps sound unnaturally loud and the rustle of leaves could be anything. As I pushed through the last stretch of thorny bushes, I finally broke out into the clearing. And there it was, the Sentinel. A magnificent, imposing slab of granite rising abruptly from the forest floor. It was beautiful, rugged, and exactly as I remembered it, or so I thought. I dropped my pack, took a long swig of water, and started my usual pre-climb routine. I stared up at the rock, tracing the lines, picturing my route. My eyes instinctively went to the handholds, the small cracks, the subtle changes in texture I'd memorized. There was a distinctive horizontal crack about 30 feet up that ran almost perfectly straight for a good 15 feet, then angled sharply down into a series of smaller diagonal fissures. Below that, a unique, almost circular depression where I usually got my first good rest. But as I looked, something didn't quite sit right. It was subtle at first, like trying to remember a dream you just woke from. The overall shape was the same, yes, but the details, they seemed off. That horizontal crack, the one I knew so well, it looked longer somehow, straighter, and the way it angled down, it didn't seem to have the same sharp turn. It was a smoother curve, flowing into those diagonal fissures that, now that I was truly focusing, appeared shallower, less pronounced than I remembered. I blinked, shook my head slightly. It must be the light, I told myself. The setting sun was casting long shadows, playing tricks on my eyes. I pulled out my phone, intending to check the photos I'd taken during my last visit to reassure myself. But of course, in my haste to get out the door, I'd forgotten to charge it, dead as a doornail. A familiar knot of unease tightened in my stomach. It wasn't fear, not yet. More like annoyance, a frustration with my faulty memory, combined with that primal sense of something being subtly, inexplicably wrong. The air itself seemed to grow heavy, the forest around me suddenly quieter. The usual chirping of late afternoon birds, the distant hum of insects, they were gone, swallowed by a profound, unnatural silence. The only sound was the faint whisper of the wind through the pines at the very top of the cliff, a sound that in that moment felt less like nature and more like a held breath. My own. I stood there for a long moment, caught between the rational explanations my mind desperately offered and the prickling sensation that whispered something far more unsettling. The sun dipped lower, casting the western side of the sentinel into shadow, deepening the contours of the rock face. Maybe it was just the changing light, I reasoned, or the way my memory had stylized the details. I'd been tired after the long drive and hike. My phone was dead, so I couldn't double-check my photos. It was entirely possible I was simply misremembering. But the silence, that was harder to explain away. It was too absolute, too heavy. Not the peaceful quiet of a wilderness evening, but an unnatural hush, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Still, I was a climber. I trusted my eyes, my hands, my judgment, and I'd come all this way. The desire to be on the rock, to feel the familiar granite beneath my fingertips, was a powerful pull. It was my sanctuary, the one place where things made sense. I told myself to shake it off, to focus on the climb. I started my routine, forcing a sense of normalcy. I laid out my rope, coiled neatly, then began sorting my gear. Cams, nuts, quick draws, each piece a familiar weight, a promise of security. I double-checked my harness, tightened the leg loops, made sure the buckle was secure. As I clipped my rack to the gear loops, the metallic clink seemed shockingly loud in the profound quiet. I powdered my hands with chalk, taking a deep breath of the dusty, earthy scent. My eyes scanned the route again, trying to recalibrate. The circular depression, my first rest spot, seemed a little shallower than I remembered, its edges less defined. And that horizontal crack, it still looked too long, too straight, but I pushed the thoughts down. Focus, I muttered to myself, the sound feeling strange and foreign in the silent air. You know this rock, trust your instincts. With a final check, I tied into the rope, secured the knot, and took a deep breath. I walked to the base of the slab, placed my hands on the cool granite, and began to ascend. The initial movements were fluid, muscle memory taking over. I found the familiar sequence of small foot smears and positive handholds. The rock felt solid, reassuringly rough beneath my fingers. I moved upward, gaining height steadily. The rhythmic scrape of my climbing shoes, the subtle flex of the rope, the grunt of effort, these were the sounds I expected, the sounds of control and progress. I reached the first anchor point I'd planned for the lower section, a small, sturdy-looking ledge where I could place my first piece of protection. It was a good 30 feet up, exactly where I expected it. I found a deep-set fissure, perfect for a cam, and started to work it in. But as my fingers explored the crack, a new wave of unease washed over me. The rock here, specifically within this fissure, felt different. It wasn't just the expected cold roughness of granite. There was a subtle slickness, a very fine, almost imperceptible coating that made my fingers slide just a touch. It felt like polished stone, but it shouldn't be. This was raw granite, exposed to the elements, and it wasn't wet. My chalked fingers should have gripped it perfectly. It was a sensation I'd never encountered on the Sentinel before, or on any granite climb, for that matter. I pulled my hand back, frowning, and tried again, the same sensation. It wasn't enough to make the climb impossible, but it was unnerving, like trying to write on paper that was almost, but not quite, waterproof. I placed the cam, testing it carefully, pulling on it with my full weight. It held, thankfully. The gear was solid, just as it should be, but the feeling lingered, a tiny, persistent discord in the symphony of my senses. I continued upward, reaching the circular depression I used as a rest. I pulled myself into it, my knees bent, resting my weight on my feet, and leaned my head back against the cool rock. From this vantage point, I could look directly across at the horizontal crack. And my stomach dropped. It wasn't just my memory playing tricks. It wasn't the light. The crack was different. It was undeniably longer, spanning a greater distance than I remembered. And it was smoother, too. The characteristic rough edges, the slight undulations that made it a natural traverse line were gone. It was like a ruler had been pressed against the rock, drawing a perfectly straight, almost sterile line. It looked less like a natural geological feature and more like something carved or perhaps stretched. A cold dread began to seep into my bones. This wasn't a minor detail, a trick of the light. This was a fundamental change to the very geography of the rock. The impossible, the irrational, was starting to assert itself with chilling clarity. I pushed myself off the rest, my movements less fluid now, tinged with a growing anxiety. My eyes scanned the crack, searching for the familiar, but it wasn't there. The sharp angle downwards, the one that led into the series of smaller diagonal fissures, it was indeed a smoother curve. And the diagonal fissures themselves, they were shallower, almost ghosting into the rock face, as if they were fading. This wasn't a misremembered detail, this was an active, ongoing alteration. The thought, once dismissed as absurd, now hammered at the inside of my skull. The rock was changing. As I looked at it, it was changing. I tried to rationalize earthquake, some kind of slow geological shift, but the changes were too precise, too specific. And the feeling of slickness in the first fissure, it didn't fit with a geological explanation. A sudden, sharp, metallic ping echoed from above. It was the sound of a small stone dislodging, hitting the rock face higher up, then skipping down before disappearing into the rhododendrons below. My head snapped up, heart pounding. I was alone, wasn't I? There shouldn't be anyone else here. I scanned the rock face, the top of the cliff, the dense foliage around me. Nothing. Just the unsettling, unnatural silence that had returned deeper than before. My hands felt clammy despite the chalk. This was a place I knew, a sanctuary. Now it felt alien, hostile. Every instinct screamed at me to descend, to get away. But another part, the stubborn, curious climber, wanted answers. What was happening? Could I trust my own senses? I took a shaky breath and decided to continue. Just a little further, I told myself. To the next piece of protection to see if the changes were uniform or localized. Maybe I could find a logical explanation if I just got closer. It was a mistake, I knew even then, a dangerous curiosity eclipsing common sense. I traversed along the altered horizontal crack. It felt strangely smooth, almost unnaturally so. My fingers found purchase, but it wasn't the familiar, reassuring bite of sharp granite. It was like gripping polished stone, requiring more effort, more precision, more trust in the friction of my shoes than the security of my hands. My mind raced, trying to find a parallel. Had a flash flood scoured the specific section, eroding the details. But how could it smooth such a broad, horizontal plane without affecting the rock above or below in the same way? I reached the point where the crack curved downwards into the diagonal fissures. I remembered this section being tricky, requiring a precise foot placement and a strong pull on a deep handhold. Now the handhold was shallower, almost worn away. I had to adjust my body position, stretching further, making a more precarious move. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just a slight alteration, it was affecting the difficulty of the climb, making it harder, less predictable. I managed the move, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I found a small pocket for a nut, my next piece of protection, and worked it in. My hands were trembling slightly as I clipped the rope. I took another look around, searching for any sign, any explanation. The forest below remained still, shrouded in deepening twilight. The air grew colder, and a faint, acrid smell, like ozone mixed with something metallic, began to tickle my nostrils. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it added to the growing sense of wrongness. I was about 70 feet up now, well past the point of casual descent. Going back down would be almost as difficult as continuing, especially with the altered features. I was committed. The overhang, the sentinel's defining feature, loomed above me, another 80 feet higher. As I climbed higher, the feeling of subtle slickness returned in other sections, not everywhere, but in patches, like an invisible hand had selectively polished the rock. It was unsettling. It broke my rhythm, forcing me to constantly reevaluate my holds, to question what I thought I knew. I was climbing less on instinct, more on a heightened, fearful awareness. I reached another significant feature I remembered clearly, a series of 3 small, overlapping ledges that formed a miniature staircase. They were distinct, offering solid foot placements and decent handholds for a few critical moves. I'd always thought of them as a welcome respite, a reliable sequence. But when I reached them, they weren't there. My hand reached for the first ledge, expecting the solid granite, but found only a smooth, unbroken wall. My foot searched for the second, and again, nothing. The rock was seamless, a blank canvas where those distinct ledges should have been. It was as if they had been erased, not eroded, not broken off, but simply gone. My breath hitched, my entire body froze, my fingers scrabbled uselessly against the smooth surface. This was no trick of light, no faulty memory. This was impossible. Physically, geologically impossible. Ledges don't just vanish. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. I was 70 feet up, relying on a route that was actively, inexplicably changing beneath my hands and feet. The reality of my situation hit me with brutal force. I was alone. My phone was dead. No one knew I was here, and the very ground beneath me was transforming. I pressed my face against the rock, trying to suppress a rising scream. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against the profound silence of the forest. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them, hoping it was an illusion, a nightmare. But the smooth, featureless rock was still there. Where the ledges had been, there was now only a slight bulge, barely enough to smear a foot on, certainly not enough to hold my weight. My mind raced, frantically trying to adjust. I had to find a new route on the fly, on a rock face that was no longer predictable. My logical, analytical climber's brain, usually so calm and methodical, felt like it was short-circuiting. I breathed deeply, forcing myself to look around to find something. My eyes darted left, then right. Above, the overhang still loomed. Below, the forest floor was a distant, dark green blur. To my left, there was a shallow, almost vertical crack that I vaguely remembered as being impassable, too narrow for fingers, too smooth for a cam. But now, I squinted. The crack seemed wider, deeper, not significantly, but enough to offer some purchase. Was it changing too, or had I simply misjudged it before, dismissing it too quickly in favor of the easier ledges? I had no choice. I couldn't go down the way I came, not with the ledges gone. My only option was to find an alternate path, to adapt. It was the climber's mantra, adapt or fall. But this wasn't adaptation to a difficult move, it was adaptation to a reality that defied all laws of nature. Carefully, meticulously, I began to traverse towards the crack. Each movement was slow, deliberate, laden with a fear I'd never truly known. Every handhold, every foot placement was a gamble. I ran my fingers over the granite, expecting the familiar, but now dreading the unexpected. The rock felt alive, not in a comforting way, but in a subtly malevolent one, as if it was shifting, breathing beneath my touch. I reached the crack. It was indeed wider, just enough for my fingertips to wedge in, enough to get a few good purchase points. It was still a tough climb, a technical one, but it was possible. As I started to ascend within the crack, I noticed something else. The granite inside the fissure was a slightly different shade, a darker, almost purplish hue compared to the lighter gray of the surrounding rock, and it felt rougher, sharper than the rest of the rock, almost crystalline. It was a stark contrast to the slick, polished patches I'd encountered earlier. It was as if two different kinds of stone were merging or battling on the same surface. My progress was agonizingly slow. Each new hold required a moment of hesitation, a quick reassessment. I was constantly checking, double-checking my memory against the reality and finding them at odds. The sun was almost gone now, the sky a deep indigo, streaked with the last fiery embers of sunset. Soon it would be dark. I needed to move faster, but fear and caution held me back. I was nearing the base of the overhang when I felt it, a faint vibration. Not like an earthquake, not a tremor through the ground, but a buzzing, a low hum that seemed to emanate directly from the rock face itself, traveling up through my hands and feet. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like a very distant machine, but it grew slowly, steadily, until it was a distinct, low thrumming that resonated through my entire body. The ozone smell intensified, becoming sharper, more metallic, and the air, already cold, felt somehow charged. My hair prickled on my arms, a sensation of static electricity in the air. I clung to a hold, pressing myself against the rock, trying to understand. What was this? Was the rock vibrating? Was it alive? The thought was absurd, yet terrifyingly real in that moment. The thrumming intensified, and with it, a faint, internal groan. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, not exactly. It was a deep, resonant vibration that I felt in my chest, in my bones. It felt like the rock was sighing or perhaps shifting. And then above me, on the underside of the massive overhang, I saw it. A faint pulsating light. It wasn't a flashlight. It wasn't the reflection of moonlight or stars. It was an internal glow, a soft, ethereal luminescence that emanated from within the granite itself. It was a pale, bluish-white light, almost like foxfire, but more concentrated, more powerful. It appeared as a series of delicate, shimmering veins that ran along the contours of the rock, highlighting patterns I'd never seen before. They pulsed softly, in time with the low thrumming, like slow heartbeats. I stared, mesmerized and horrified. This was beyond any rational explanation. This was beyond anything I had ever conceived of. The rock was not just changing, it was glowing. It was resonating. It was alive, in a way that defied every single scientific principle I understood. My mind reeled. Was I hallucinating? Was I exhausted, dehydrated, cracking under the pressure of the solo climb? I pinched myself hard. The pain was real. The cold sweat trickling down my spine was real. The thrumming in my chest was real. And the pulsating blue light, tracing impossible patterns on the underside of the overhang, was horrifyingly real. The silence of the forest outside this immediate zone of strange activity was absolute, creating a bizarre contrast. It was as if the sentinel was a world unto itself, humming with its own impossible energy, separated from the quiet, normal woods by an invisible barrier. The light seemed to draw me, even as it terrified me. It wasn't bright enough to truly illuminate the entire overhang, but it cast a strange, wavering glow on the rock directly above me, revealing textures and shapes I couldn't discern in the fading light. Some of these shapes seemed almost geometric, not natural crystalline formations, but something more deliberate, like faint, angular carvings just beneath the surface, revealed by the internal luminescence. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, to descend at all costs, but my limbs felt heavy, anchored to the rock by a strange mix of terror and an almost magnetic fascination. I was a witness to something utterly unprecedented, something that shattered my understanding of the world. The thrumming grew louder, more insistent, vibrating up my arms, through my chest, into my very teeth. It felt like the rock itself was struggling to contain some immense internal power, and the blue light intensified, the veins growing wider, brighter, casting longer, shifting shadows. I had to get away. This wasn't a climb anymore. This was a direct encounter with something fundamentally wrong, something dangerous. My climber's instincts, usually so clear, were muddled by sheer, unadulterated terror. Get down now. But getting down wasn't easy. I was high up, almost at the base of the overhang. Below me, the ledges were gone. The route was altered. Descending in the dark on a changing, glowing, humming rock felt almost as perilous as continuing up into the impossible light. I looked down into the deepening gloom. The ground was barely visible, a black expanse swallowed by shadows. The air felt heavy, metallic, almost suffocating. The thrumming was now a continuous, vibrating drone, a sound that seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere at once. My gaze was drawn back to the overhang. The blue veins of light were now fully illuminated, forming intricate, symmetrical patterns that seemed to shift and reform like living circuitry. They weren't random cracks, they were a deliberate design. A design that was embedded within the rock, or perhaps was the rock. And then, as I watched transfixed, a new sound emerged from the drone. A faint, high-pitched whine, like something building energy, something winding up. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the thrumming, piercing the unnatural silence of the forest. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, I tried to force myself to move, to start the arduous descent. But just as I shifted my weight, the blue light flared, blindingly bright for an instant, encompassing the entire underside of the overhang. The thrumming peaked, becoming a deafening roar that vibrated through my very bones, shaking me to my core. The next thing I knew, a searing pain ripped through my left hand, then my right. The holds I was clinging to, the rough, crystalline granite within the fissure, were suddenly no longer solid. They felt soft, like they were melting, or perhaps more accurately, changing. I gasped, my grip failing. My fingers slipped, not from sweat, not from fatigue, but because the rock itself was deforming under my touch. The crystalline structure was softening, collapsing, turning into something slick and yielding, like warm wax. My feet lost purchase. The friction I depended on was gone. The rock beneath me felt fluid, unstable, like a wave trying to escape my grasp. I was falling. A primal scream tore from my throat, lost in the overwhelming roar of the rock. I scrabbled desperately, clawing at the shimmering, deforming surface, but there was nothing to hold onto. The blue light pulsed around me, illuminating my terrified descent. The world spun. The ozone smell was overpowering. I closed my eyes, bracing for impact, for the shattering end. I thought of Mark, of the life I'd lived, of the solid ground I had always trusted. And then everything went black. But the fall didn't end. Instead of the crushing impact I expected, there was a strange, sudden lurch. It was like falling through something viscous, something that slowed my descent, cushioning me but still pulling me downwards. The roar ceased abruptly, replaced by an eerie, profound silence. The blue light vanished. I opened my eyes, disoriented, my head throbbing. I wasn't on the ground. I was suspended. My body was floating somehow in midair. I was no longer clinging to the rock, nor was I falling freely. I was simply there in a space that felt both empty and contained. It was dark, a darkness deeper than any night, absolute and suffocating. I couldn't see my hands, couldn't see anything. Panic threatened to overwhelm me again, but it was a different kind of panic now. A dizzying, disorienting terror of the unknown. I tried to move my arms, my legs. They responded, but without the resistance of air, without gravity. It was like being in water, but without the wetness, without the sensation of buoyancy. Just effortless, meaningless motion. My head swam. What was happening? Had I hit my head? Was this a dream, a concussion-induced hallucination? I reached out, my fingers searching for something, anything solid. There was nothing, just empty space. But then, as my hand extended, I felt a faint, almost electric tingle, like static electricity dancing on my fingertips. It was subtle, barely there, but it was something. I tried to orient myself. Where was up, where was down, in this profound darkness, in this strange suspension, all sense of direction was lost. My stomach churned, a profound nausea rising within me. This was wrong, all wrong. Then a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the pressure around me. It was like a breath, a slow, gentle intake of air that pulled at my clothes, at my skin. And with that shift, a new sensation, a low hum, not the violent, roaring thrumming of the rock, but a softer, deeper vibration that resonated through the very fabric of this dark space. It was a familiar sound, yet alien in this context, like the hum of a massive, ancient machine buried deep beneath the earth. I strained my eyes, trying to pierce the absolute darkness. My vision began to blur, then to sharpen, as if my eyes were adjusting to a light that wasn't quite there, or to a new form of perception. And slowly, agonizingly slowly, faint outlines began to emerge from the black. They were geometric, lines, angles, curves that were too perfect, too precise to be natural. They seemed to shimmer, barely visible against the dark, like strands of almost invisible silk. They were all around me, forming a colossal, intricate structure. I wasn't in empty space. I was inside something vast. And as my eyes adjusted further, a single point of light appeared in the distance, directly in front of me. It was small, a pinprick of pure white, but it wasn't static. It was expanding. Slowly, steadily, growing larger, revealing more of the impossible structure around me. The light grew, and with it, details emerged from the darkness. I was in a massive, cylindrical chamber. The walls, floor, and ceiling were made of the same dark material, incredibly smooth, reflecting no light, yet somehow defined by the faint shimmering lines that interlaced across its surface. It was unlike any man-made structure I'd ever seen. It was vast, silent, and utterly alien. The light source was at the far end of the chamber, now a growing circle of pure, intense white. It was approaching me, or I was approaching it. I couldn't tell which. My sense of motion was completely distorted. As the light expanded, I could see that the cylindrical chamber was not empty. Other forms began to appear in the darkness, suspended just as I was. They were elongated, organic shapes, some twisted, some strangely symmetrical. They were unmoving, silent, like ghostly statues caught in the void, and as the light grew, I could see them more clearly. They were bodies. Human bodies. They were suspended in various states of dress, some in hiking gear like mine, some in older, more tattered clothing, some completely naked. Their faces were serene, eyes closed, expressions peaceful as if asleep. But there was a gray pallor to their skin, an unnatural stillness that screamed not alive. They looked perfectly preserved, suspended in this strange, silent limbo. My blood ran cold. These were not statues. These were people, and I was among them. The light continued to expand, revealing more and more of the chamber, more and more of the suspended dead. There were dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, stretching into the unseen distances of the colossal cylinder, a silent, macabre gallery. And then, as the light filled the chamber, becoming almost blinding, I saw the source. It wasn't a lamp or a window. It was a portal, a shimmering, perfectly circular aperture of pure white light hovering at the far end of the cylinder. It pulsated gently like a colossal eye drawing everything towards it, or perhaps emitting the strange energy that held us all suspended. My mind screamed this was impossible. This was a nightmare. This was not real. But the cold, empty feeling in my gut, the sight of the dead, the absolute alienness of the chamber, it was all too real. I was floating towards the portal. Slowly, inexorably, I was being drawn to the growing circle of light. The other bodies, too, were drifting, a silent procession of the dead and the terrified, all moving towards the blinding white heart of this impossible place. I tried to fight it, to move my limbs, to swim against the invisible current, but it was useless. I was powerless, a leaf caught in an unseen eddy. The light intensified, washing over me, consuming me. It wasn't warm or cold, just intensely, utterly brilliant. As I neared the portal, the hum intensified again, becoming a deep, resonant tone that filled my entire being, shaking the very cells of my body. It was a sound beyond sound, a vibration of pure energy. And as I passed through the threshold of the light, the final coherent thought that formed in my mind was not of fear, but of profound, terrifying realization. The sentinel wasn't just a rock, it was a doorway, and I had just walked through it. The light enveloped me completely. For a moment, there was nothing but pure, undifferentiated white. No sight, no sound, no sensation of touch or feeling, just existence. A blank slate. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, new sensations began to filter in, not through my eyes or ears or skin, but directly into my mind. Impressions, images, sounds, feelings, they weren't my memories, they were foreign. It was like a torrent of information, rushing into my brain, bypassing my senses entirely. I saw shapes that defied 3 dimensions, colors that didn't exist on Earth, structures that were both ancient and impossibly advanced. I heard harmonies that were mathematical constructs, not musical notes. I felt emotions that were vast and impersonal, like the deep currents of an ocean. I was no longer myself. My individual consciousness was being subsumed, overwhelmed by this flood of alien data. I was an open vessel, absorbing the impossible. It was terrifying, but also in a strange, detached way beautiful. A glimpse into something so vast, so profound, that it defied all human understanding. a universe of pure information, pure energy, pure thought. Then, as suddenly as it began, it receded. The torrent slowed, the images faded, the sounds softened. My own consciousness, battered and reeling, began to reassert itself like a tiny candle relighting in a hurricane. The white light softened, diffused. The feeling of being suspended, of effortless motion, returned, and as my vision cleared, I saw a new space. It was still vast, still alien, but different from the cylindrical chamber. This space was open, boundless, stretching into an infinite distance. It was filled with a soft, ambient light that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. And in this immense void, structures floated. They were colossal, geometric forms, incredibly complex, shimmering with the same faint blue light I had seen on the Sentinel. They were like cities or perhaps colossal machines drifting slowly in this ethereal ocean. Some were cubes perfectly rendered. Others were intricate fractals, endless patterns repeating within themselves. Still others were organic in their complexity, like immense metallic flowers slowly unfurling in the void. And between these floating marvels, other forms drifted. More of the suspended bodies, the silent, gray-skinned humans, but also other shapes. Some I recognized as animals, bears, deer, even birds, all perfectly preserved, floating serenely. And other shapes that I didn't recognize at all. Biologically impossible forms, multi-limbed, multi-eyed, strange beings of unknown origin, all suspended in the same silent drift. My mind struggled to cope, to categorize, to even begin to understand. Was this another chamber, a different dimension? The very idea of dimension seemed too small for this place. I was still floating, still propelled by an unseen force, moving slowly through this astonishing, terrifying tableau. I passed close to one of the colossal structures. It was a cube, thousands of feet on each side, its surface composed of interlocking panels that pulsed with that faint blue light. As I drew nearer, I could see intricate etchings on its surface, symbols that looked both ancient and hyper-advanced, shimmering just beneath the skin of the cube. And then a sound, not the hum, not the thrum, but a new sound. It was subtle at first, a faint, almost musical chime resonating from within the cube. It grew softly, layering itself into a complex, ethereal melody that filled the void. It wasn't a melody I knew or one I could even describe. It was pure harmony, mathematically precise, yet imbued with an emotional quality that was both profound and utterly alien. It was beautiful, yet it sent shivers down my spine. My own body still felt weak, my head swimming. The overload of information from the portal had left me feeling like a shattered vessel. But my terror was beginning to give way to something else, a deep, profound awe, a terrifying, humbling realization of how infinitesimally small I was, how utterly insignificant my understanding of reality had been. I drifted past the cube, carried by the invisible current, more structures, more suspended life forms. The entire space was a silent, moving gallery of the impossible, and I was now a part of it. I couldn't feel hunger or thirst or even the cold. My physical needs seemed to be suspended, just like my body. I was simply an observer moving through this impossible realm, but beneath the awe, the terror still gnawed. What was this place? Why were we here? And what would happen next? My gaze drifted to a cluster of the human bodies. They were close enough now for me to see their faces clearly. They were young, old men, women, people of all races, all with that same serene gray pallor, all in various states of preservation, caught in their final moments. One man, his face weathered, his hiking boots still on, was clutching a small, leather-bound journal to his chest. Another, a young woman, was wearing what looked like a t-shirt from a local Asheville brewery. She looked so familiar, so utterly human in this impossible place. A sharp, searing pain shot through my head, a sudden, blinding flash of pure white light behind my eyes. It was accompanied by a burst of fragmented images, a mountain peak, a familiar climbing hold, the face of someone I knew but couldn't quite place. And then just as quickly it vanished, leaving behind only a dull ache and a profound sense of loss. It felt like a memory ripped from my mind, or perhaps a foreign memory forcibly inserted. The line between what was mine and what was being implanted was blurring. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This place was doing something to us. It wasn't just holding us, it was interacting, perhaps even processing us. The torrent of information, the suspension, the impossible structures, the preserved bodies, it all pointed to something far more complex, far more terrifying than a mere anomaly. I was in a facility, an alien facility, and I was, along with all the others, an exhibit, or perhaps a resource. The thought was paralyzing. I was no longer a climber, an adventurer. I was an object, a specimen, suspended in a boundless, impossible museum run by beings I couldn't even begin to comprehend. My destiny was no longer in my hands, it was in theirs. As this terrifying realization settled in, my focus sharpened, cutting through the awe and the lingering confusion. I had to understand. I had to find a way out. Even if it seemed impossible, my very being screamed for survival. This was a challenge unlike any mountain, a climb far more perilous than the Sentinel itself. My eyes swept across the vast, silent collection of suspended life, searching for a weakness, a pattern, a hint, anything that could give me an edge, a glimmer of hope in this alien abyss. And then I saw it. Amidst the silent procession of bodies, one figure was different. It was human, dressed in clothing that looked similar to mine, a faded red flannel shirt and denim jeans. But unlike the others, this figure wasn't completely still. There was a subtle tremor in its hand, a barely perceptible clench of its jaw. Its eyes, though mostly closed, flickered. This person was awake, or at least stirring. A surge of desperate hope, sharp and painful, shot through me. I wasn't alone. There was another consciousness in this terrifying, beautiful prison. My gaze locked onto the figure, willing it to open its eyes, to acknowledge my presence. My own body was still numb, my muscles unresponsive, but a flicker of determination ignited within me. I tried to move, to push myself towards the figure. My limbs responded sluggishly, as if wading through thick mud. There was no resistance, no purchase, just the strange, frictionless glide. I moved, but without direction, simply drifting aimlessly in the void. Frustration, hot and raw, bubbled up. I couldn't call out. The silent chamber swallowed any sound, any attempt at communication. My throat felt constricted, my voice box useless. It was like screaming underwater, unheard and unseen. I was utterly alone in my terror, even with another conscious being so close. I focused on the figure again. The tremor in its hand was more pronounced now, a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch. The eyelids fluttered once more, revealing just a sliver of dark iris, then closed again. Was it struggling against the same paralyzing suspension, or was it merely on the verge of waking, caught between worlds like me? As I drifted slowly, agonizingly, past the cluster of bodies, I realized I was moving away from the stirring figure. The unseen current that propelled us through this space was relentless, indifferent to my desperation. I stretched out a hand, a futile gesture, watching the opportunity recede into the soft, ambient light. The crushing despair returned, alone, utterly, irrevocably alone. But then, just as the figure began to fade from view, its eyes snapped open. They were wide, dark, and filled with a terror that mirrored my own. For a split second, our gazes met across the impossible expanse. In that brief, terrifying connection, I saw understanding, panic, and a desperate plea. A silent scream. Then the current pulled me further, and the face, the eyes, the last flicker of human connection vanished into the shimmering distance. I was adrift once more, a single consciousness swallowed by the alien vastness. The encounter, brief as it was, had jolted something loose within me. It wasn't just fear now, it was a desperate, burning need to understand, to survive, and perhaps to find that person again. There was another. I wasn't the sole anomaly. That changed everything. I began to experiment with my body, with my movement. The sensation was like being in a dream where physical laws are fluid. I tried to push against the invisible current, flexing my core muscles, flailing my arms and legs. It was exhausting, producing only negligible results. My movements were slow, ponderous, like a deep-sea diver in zero gravity. The metallic ozone smell from the Sentinel had faded, replaced by the faint, unidentifiable scent of this new space. A clean, sterile aroma, like ozone mixed with something subtly organic, yet not of this world. It was a smell that spoke of immense, contained power. I continued to drift, passing more of the colossal structures. One was shaped like an immense, inverted pyramid, its facets reflecting the ambient light in a way that defied optics, bending and distorting the surrounding space. Another was a vast, shimmering sphere, its surface covered in what looked like billions of tiny, interlocking scales, each one pulsing with the faint blue light. The scale of these objects was staggering, dwarfing any natural or man-made structure I had ever seen. They were not merely large, they were architecturally impossible. Constructions that hinted at a mastery of physics and engineering utterly beyond human comprehension. My mind, still reeling from the information overload and the shock of my new reality, struggled to process these sights. It felt like my brain was being stretched, forced to accommodate concepts and aesthetics it was never designed to hold. A terrifying realization settled in. My perception of reality, the very framework of my understanding, was being systematically dismantled. As I approached another cluster of suspended bodies, I noticed something new. Some of the human figures, unlike the serene, grace-skinned ones I had seen before, seemed to be in various stages of disintegration. Not decay, not rot, but a slow, ethereal fading. Their edges were indistinct, their forms blurring, as if they were dissolving into the ambient light, becoming one with the void. It was a horrifying sight, a silent, macabre demonstration of a process I couldn't begin to fathom. Were they being absorbed, processed, or simply erased? The terror ratcheted up another notch. Was this my fate, to slowly dissolve into nothingness, my identity, my very existence, becoming a faint memory in this alien museum? The thought spurred a new burst of frantic energy. I had to find a way out. I had to fight. My eyes darted across the silent tableau, searching for anything that might offer a clue, a weakness, a direction. The immense structures, the floating bodies, the infinite, silent void, it was overwhelming. But somewhere there had to be an answer. I noticed that the bodies, including mine, were all moving in a relatively straight line, a slow, gentle procession towards a distant, ever-present light source. It wasn't a portal like the first one, but a generalized emanation, a directionality to the light that suggested a front to this impossible space. It was like being drawn on a conveyor belt, slow but inexorable. I tried to use this information. If there was a flow, could I maneuver against it or perhaps with it to a different destination? I focused my efforts on trying to orient my body, to turn it so that my head was pointing towards the general direction of the light. It was difficult, like turning a massive log in water, but slowly, painstakingly, I managed to shift my orientation. As I rotated, my gaze swept past another section of the museum. Here, the structures were different. Instead of colossal geometric forms, there were what looked like immense, glowing filaments, impossibly thin and intricate, weaving through the void like giant spider webs. They pulsed with a faster, more urgent blue light, casting intricate, shifting shadows on themselves. And within these webs, something else was suspended. They weren't bodies, they were fragments, pieces of things. A single, perfectly preserved human eye suspended in a liquid that wasn't there. A hand still clenched in a fist, drifting slowly. A shard of what looked like polished obsidian, intricately carved with symbols that pulsed with their own faint light. A single, perfect feather, iridescent and delicate. Each fragment was encased in its own shimmering, invisible field, like a jewel in a display case. This was truly a collection, not just of whole beings, but of parts, of objects, of memories. It was an inventory, a vast, incomprehensible catalog of existence. The implications were chilling. If they collected parts, if they collected memories, what did they do with them? A searing pain shot through my head again, sharper this time. The fragmented images returned, more vivid, more insistent. I saw a face, clear as day, Mark, my climbing partner, his easy smile, the crinkle around his eyes, a flash of memory, us on a climb, sharing a laugh after a particularly tricky pitch. The taste of a cold beer after a long day on the rock, the feeling of trust, of companionship. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, leaving behind not just an ache, but a profound emptiness, as if something precious had been ripped from my soul. It wasn't just a memory, it was the essence of that memory, the emotional weight, the personal significance. This was what they were doing. They were extracting information, emotions, experiences. My very being was being siphoned, dissected, archived. My sense of self was being eroded, not by physical pain, but by the systematic dismantling of my internal world. Panic, cold and absolute, gripped me. I was being unmade. Every fear, every instinct screamed at me to resist, to fight. But how do you fight against the invisible forces of a cosmic supercomputer? How do you fight against the erosion of your own mind? I focused on my breathing, on the rhythmic pulse of my own terrified heart. It was the only thing that felt real, the only anchor in this terrifying sea of alien processing. I would not let them take everything. I would hold on to myself, to my memories, to my identity with every fiber of my being. The slow drift continued. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the overwhelming visual input to focus on my internal landscape. I tried to recall specific details to solidify them in my mind. The smell of pine needles after a rain, the bite of the cold granite under my fingers, the taste of Mark's terrible, overly strong coffee, the warmth of a campfire on a chilly night. I clung to these fragments of my life, desperately trying to protect them from the unseen scavengers of this place. But even with my eyes closed, the impressions continued to flood my mind. Not images now, but pure data. Patterns, algorithms, complex equations that seemed to rearrange themselves into concepts of time, space, and energy. It was like being force-fed a universe of pure mathematics, beautiful and terrifying in its raw complexity. My mind felt like it was expanding and fracturing at the same time. unable to contain the sheer volume of information. The internal hum of the facility, which had been a low, distant drone, began to change. It subtly shifted in pitch, layering itself with new frequencies. It was still non-musical in any conventional sense, but it felt like a complex language, a continuous stream of information being transmitted and received. I could almost feel the data flowing through the void, weaving around and through the suspended bodies and structures. We were not just floating through a museum, we were floating through a vast, living network. I opened my eyes, determined to find some pattern, some weakness. I looked at the shimmering, geometric structures now with a new perspective. They weren't just architecture, they were components. They were processing units, storage banks, conduits of this alien data stream. The blue light, the pulsating veins on the sentinel, the internal glow of the structures. It was all part of the same colossal, unfathomable system. My gaze settled on a particular cube-shaped structure that was closer than the others. It was immense, its surface covered in the pulsing blue light and the strange geometric etchings. As I drifted nearer, I could see that some of the etchings were actually very faint, almost invisible lines that seemed to form patterns. They were like circuits, glowing faintly under the skin of the cube. And then, as I watched, one of these faint lines on the surface of the cube began to brighten. It pulsed slowly at first, then more rapidly, like a heartbeat. The blue light intensified along that specific line, tracing a path across the surface. Then another line adjacent to it began to pulse, and another. Soon a complex, shifting pattern of light was rippling across the cube's surface, like energy flowing through a massive circuit board. This was it. This was an active process. This was the facility at work. My own body began to respond to the shift in energy. The subtle buzzing sensation returned, stronger now, vibrating through my very bones. My hair prickled again, and I felt a faint warmth emanating from the nearest structure. It was an uncomfortable warmth, not comforting, but the kind that precedes a surge of power. I was getting closer to the source of the operations, the heart of this alien machine. The flow of bodies seemed to converge slightly here, drawn into a slow, wide spiral around the active cube. It was like approaching the mouth of a massive, silent whirlpool. Fear, raw and primal, threatened to paralyze me again. But the climber in me, the part that analyzed, adapted, and fought for survival, pushed through. This was information. This was a clue. If I could understand how it worked, perhaps I could find a way to disrupt it, to escape. I focused on the patterns of light on the cube. They weren't random. They seemed to follow a logic, a sequence. Lines brightened, dimmed, intersected, merged, and split apart. It was like watching a vast alien language unfold, written in light. My mind, still raw from the information torrent, tried to grasp it, to find meaning. Then a new phenomenon. As the light patterns intensified on the cube, the suspended bodies nearest to it began to exhibit changes. Not the slow disintegration I'd observed earlier, but something more active. Some bodies began to twitch, to convulse almost imperceptibly, as if a faint electric current was passing through them. Others began to glow faintly from within, a pale, almost phosphorescent light that emanated from their skin, outlining their forms in an ethereal haze. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was terrifying. These were not just inert specimens, they were being actively manipulated, perhaps even powered by the energy flowing through the cube. I felt the faint glow begin within myself. A subtle warmth spread beneath my skin, an internal light blooming in my chest, my limbs. It was a strange, unsettling sensation, like my very cells were being charged, animated by an unseen force. The humming in the void intensified, and the ozone smell became sharper, more potent. My vision seemed to heighten, my senses becoming unnaturally acute. I could see the minute details of the nearest bodies, the fine lines of their clothing, the subtle textures of their skin with incredible clarity. I could almost feel the flow of energy in the space around me, a silent, invisible current. Then, as my body began to glow more intensely, the fragmented memories returned, but this time they weren't just flashes. They were complex, layered, almost tactile. I saw my childhood home, the worn wooden floorboards, the scent of my mother's baking. I felt the rough bark of the first tree I ever climbed, the scrape of granite on my knees. I heard the distant laughter of friends, the roar of a waterfall. But they weren't just my memories. They were intertwined with other memories, faint echoes of lives I hadn't lived. A memory of standing on a vast, wind-swept plain beneath a sky with two moons. A memory of the rhythmic thrum of an impossible machine tending to vast, glowing fungal forests. A memory of a conversation in a language I didn't understand, filled with complex emotions I could barely begin to process. My mind was a chaotic symphony of disparate experiences, my own consciousness struggling to maintain its coherence against the onslaught of alien data and stolen human memories. They were not just extracting, they were merging. Merging information, merging consciousnesses, creating a vast, collective data stream. This facility wasn't just an archive. It was a vast, sentient supermind, integrating all forms of life and experience into its own being. We were not merely specimens, we were processors, conduits, neural nodes in its colossal alien network. The realization hit me with the force of a cosmic hammer. This was beyond horror. This was an existential terror that dissolved the very notion of self. I was becoming part of something else, something alien, something that transcended individual identity. I felt my grip on my own memories slipping. The unique texture of my past, my experiences, was blending, blurring into the vast sea of collective data. The faces of Mark, of my family, of people I loved, began to lose their specific details, becoming archetypes, generalized forms of human connection, losing their singular meaning to me. No, I wouldn't allow it. I wouldn't surrender. With a desperate internal scream that echoed only in the silent chambers of my own mind, I fought back. I clawed at my memories, gripping them with every ounce of my remaining will. I focused on the most visceral, the most personal. The burning ache in my muscles after a long climb, the unique sensation of my fingers on a specific granite hold, the smell of my own sweat mixed with chalk. The feeling of absolute singular self hundreds of feet above the ground, utterly dependent on my own skill, my own judgment. I forced myself to remember specific climbs, specific routes, the exact placement of a cam, the particular angle of a foot smear, the feeling of a specific sharp crimp. These were my anchors, the indelible marks of my experience, my body, myself. The internal glow intensified and the flood of alien data became a raging torrent. My head throbbed, my entire being felt like it was being torn apart. But I held on. I would not be consumed. I would not be erased. Then a new sensation, not a memory, not an image, but a directed thought. It wasn't in words, not in human language. It was a pure concept, an intent, projected directly into my mind. Survival protocol initiated. Unexpected resistance detected. The thought was cold, analytical, utterly devoid of emotion. It was like a diagnostic message from a machine acknowledging an anomaly. It was terrifying in its impersonal efficiency. I was not a being to be reasoned with, I was a glitch, a variable that needed to be managed. As the thought registered, the flow of alien data intensified, becoming almost unbearable. It felt like my brain was being compressed, squeezed, trying to force out the unwanted resistance. The glowing within my body flared, and the air around me seemed to crackle with an unseen energy. I was nearing the active cube now, drawn inexorably towards its pulsating surface. The other glowing, twitching bodies were closer too, a macabre ballet of silent suffering. Some were dissolving at a faster rate, their forms shimmering and fading, losing definition, their internal light dimming as if their energy was being consumed. A cold certainty settled in. This was it. This was the moment of complete absorption, of utter erasure. I had fought, but I was powerless. Just as I felt my consciousness begin to splinter, just as the last vestiges of myself threatened to collapse, a new element entered the fray. A sound. It was faint at first, a high-pitched, almost ultrasonic whine. It seemed to emanate not from the cube, but from the periphery of this vast space, from the infinite distances where the structures faded into the ambient light. The whine grew rapidly, cutting through the deep hum of the facility. It was discordant, piercing, a sharp, dissonant note that seemed to grate against the precise harmonies of the alien machine. It was a sound of disruption, of interference. The light patterns on the cube flickered, breaking their steady rhythm. The blue glow emanating from within my body and from the other bodies wavered, dimming and brightening erratically. The flow of alien data in my mind became choppy, interrupted, like a faulty transmission. The sudden instability bought me a precious second of clarity. What was happening? I strained my eyes, trying to locate the source of the disruptive whine. It was coming from somewhere far, far away, beyond the immediate range of the facility's active zone. Then, as the whine intensified to an almost painful screech, a new image burst into my mind. It was not one of the fragmented memories or alien data streams. It was sharp, vivid, and deeply unsettling. I saw the Sentinel, not as it was when I climbed it, but as it was now, glowing with an angry, pulsating blue light, but also streaked with angry, jagged lines of a furious, burning red. The overhang was not merely glowing, it was cracking, massive fissures opening across its surface, revealing a molten, incandescent core beneath. The very rock was screaming, tearing itself apart. And at the base of the Sentinel, rising from the rhododendrons, was another structure. Not one of the impossible geometric forms of this void, but something dark, organic, almost predatory. It was massive, like a colossal insect, with multiple jointed limbs digging into the earth and a central ovular body that pulsed with a deep, sickly green light. From its apex, a single, impossibly long, impossibly thin proboscis extended, reaching towards the ravaged face of the Sentinel. It was tapping into it, draining it. The portal, the doorway, was under attack. The thought projected directly into my mind by the facility was sharp, urgent, and tinged with something akin to alarm, a cold, calculating fear. Threat detected, intrusion, primary conduit breached. The flow of energy within the void became chaotic. The gentle, inexorable current that had been drawing us towards the cube now shifted, becoming erratic, swirling. Bodies spun, colliding gently with each other. The vast geometric structures began to hum with a faster, more urgent vibration, their blue light flickering wildly. The whine from the periphery intensified into a deafening shriek and then a blast. Not a sound blast, but a shockwave of pure energy that slammed into my suspended body, sending me tumbling end over end through the void. The glow within me vanished, the alien data stream cut off abruptly. The searing pain in my head receded, leaving only a dull, persistent ache. When I finally regained some semblance of orientation, still tumbling slowly, I saw the chaos. The entire void was alive with frantic, shifting energies. The massive geometric structures were still present, but their calm, collected presence was gone, replaced by a sense of immense, agitated power. The light patterns on the active cube had dissolved into a chaotic, pulsating mess. And the suspended bodies, many of them were now actively convulsing, some dissolving at an accelerated rate, others simply flickering out of existence like faulty light bulbs. The silent, macabre gallery was descending into a scene of pure, alien horror. My gaze locked onto the stirring human I had seen earlier. They were still there, still tumbling, but their eyes were wide open now, fixed on me. And this time, a sound escaped their lips. A faint, almost unheard gasp, filled with terror and something else, a desperate plea for connection. I was still being thrown about by the chaotic currents, unable to control my trajectory. But I tried with every fiber of my being to orient myself towards that other human. A tiny, fragile thread of hope had been re-established. We were both caught in this nightmare, and perhaps together we stood a chance. The projected thought from the facility returned, colder, more fragmented now. Rerouting, shutdown initiated, temporary stasis critical. Then everything went dark again. Not the absolute darkness of the cylindrical chamber, but a swirling, chaotic darkness, filled with flashes of the furious red light I had seen on the Sentinel. The profound hum of the facility died, replaced by a deafening silence that resonated with the raw metallic tang of ozone. My body was violently compressed, then stretched, then compressed again, as if caught in a monstrous, unseen vortex. The experience was short, brutal, and disorienting. When the sensations finally subsided, I found myself in a new space. It was still dark, but not completely. A faint, reddish glow permeated the air, casting long, distorted shadows. I was no longer floating freely. My body felt heavy, anchored, and I was no longer alone. I was pressed against a cold, smooth surface, the same dark, impossibly smooth material as the cylindrical chamber. But this wasn't a chamber. It was a confined space, impossibly narrow, pressing in on all sides. It felt like I was in a long, dark tunnel, just barely wide enough for my body. My arms were pinned to my sides. My legs were straight, unable to bend. I could move my head slightly, just enough to glimpse my immediate surroundings. The reddish glow seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a soft, internal luminescence. And then I became aware of a presence directly above me. My head was tilted slightly back, and my eyes, adjusting to the dim light, finally focused. It was the other human. The person I had seen stirring in the void was suspended directly above me, pressed against the ceiling of this narrow tunnel, their body mirroring my own trapped position. Their eyes were still open, wide with terror, their face pale and drawn in the eerie red light. We were facing each other, inverted, Our hands, pinned by the narrow confines, were only inches apart, outstretched towards each other in a desperate, futile gesture. The silence here was different. It wasn't the profound, heavy silence of the void or the unnatural hush of the forest. It was an oppressive, suffocating silence, the kind that accompanies deep confinement, as if the air itself was too thick to carry sound. But within that silence I could hear it, the faint, ragged sound of my own breathing, and impossibly the even fainter, shallow gasps of the person above me. We were alive, trapped, confined, but alive, and miraculously we were together. The red light intensified slightly, causing the intricate geometric lines on the dark walls to pulse with a faint internal fire. The air grew warmer and the acrid smell of ozone returned, stronger than ever. The person above me tried to speak. Their lips moved, forming a silent, desperate word that I couldn't hear. But I saw the agony in their eyes, the terror of their situation. I tried to respond, to offer some reassurance, to break the awful silence. My throat was dry, constricted, but I forced air out, trying to form a sound. Only a dry, rasping gasp escaped, lost in the oppressive quiet. Then a new sensation. A faint, rhythmic vibration began to pulse through the confined space. It was not the high-pitched whine of the intruder, nor the deep thrum of the facility. This was a mechanical vibration, rhythmic and powerful, like being inside a colossal engine that had just roared to life. It grew in intensity, shaking the very material of our prison. And with the vibration, a slow, grinding movement. The entire tunnel began to move, not through space, not floating, but a visceral, grinding motion like something being pulled, pushed, or perhaps drilled. The confinement grew even tighter, pressing against my chest, making breathing a shallow, painful effort. The realization hit me we were inside a mechanism, a part of the alien machine that had been shut down or rerouted and was now actively moving. We were no longer suspended in a museum, we were being transported somewhere. The other humans' eyes widened further, their fear echoing my own. They struggled again, a desperate, silent thrashing against their unseen bonds, against the crushing confinement. A single tear escaped their eye, tracing a path down their pale cheek, illuminated by the eerie red glow. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, but I met their gaze, trying to convey a message of shared struggle, of defiant will. We were in this together. The grinding motion intensified, the vibrations growing almost unbearable. The red light pulsed faster, and the ozone smell became so strong it burned my nostrils. I felt a profound sense of pressure building around me, as if the very space was trying to collapse in on itself. Then a new, terrifying sound pierced the mechanical grind. It was a high-pitched, metallic shriek, like metal tearing, ripping apart. It was quickly followed by a series of sharp, explosive cracks that reverberated through the tunnel, rattling my bones. The red light flickered, then abruptly cut out, plunging us into absolute darkness. The grinding motion ceased, replaced by a violent lurch, then a sudden, jarring stop that sent a sharp pain through my already strained body. Silence, a heavy, ringing silence, broken only by our ragged breaths and the faint, persistent smell of ozone and burnt metal. What had happened had the attack reached us? Was this the end? My heart pounded a frantic drum in the suffocating darkness. I tried to move, but the confinement was still absolute. My arms were still pinned, my legs locked, but the violent lurch had changed something. I could feel a subtle shift in the pressure around me. It felt less uniform, as if one side of the tunnel had buckled slightly. A faint, pale green light flickered to life in the distance, ahead of us in the tunnel. It was a sickly, unnatural green, almost phosphorescent. It cast long, wavering shadows, revealing the extent of our prison. The tunnel was indeed made of the same dark, impossibly smooth material, but now jagged, fiery red cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, glowing ominously. The smooth walls had been violently fractured. And then I saw it. The green light was not coming from the tunnel ahead. It was coming from above us, through a massive, gaping hole in the ceiling of our narrow prison. The impact, the tearing sound, it had ripped open our transport. The other human was gone. My head snapped back, eyes frantically searching the darkness above, but they were nowhere to be seen. Had they been sucked out, vaporized? My heart plummeted, a crushing weight in my chest. Then a faint sound, a choked gasp, emanated from just above my left shoulder. I strained my neck, twisting painfully, and saw them. The human was wedged into a smaller, secondary cavity just above and to the side of where they had been, partially obscured by the jagged edges of the ruptured tunnel. Their face was streaked with grime, blood trickling from a cut on their forehead, but their eyes were open, fixed on me, wide with a renewed, desperate terror. They had been thrown clear of the main exit point, trapped in a smaller fracture. They were injured, but they were still there, still alive. The sickly green light intensified, pulsating slowly from the gaping hole above. And with it, a new sound began to filter in. A low, guttural growl, deep and resonant, unlike anything I had heard before. It was predatory, threatening. My blood ran cold. Whatever had attacked the facility, whatever had ripped open our transport, was still out there, and it was coming. The pressure around me shifted again, subtly. The jagged edges of the ruptured tunnel, glowing with angry red cracks, seemed to expand ever so slightly. The confinement, for the first time, felt less absolute. I tried to move my fingers. They twitched. Then, painstakingly, I managed to curl them just a fraction. A minuscule victory, but a victory nonetheless. The shock of the impact, the disruption of the alien energy, seemed to have momentarily weakened its hold on my body. I looked at the other human, trying to convey urgency, a desperate need for them to respond. Our gazes locked again, a silent, terrified communication. Then the low growl from above intensified, and a massive, multi-jointed claw, dripping with a viscous, green-tinged fluid, scraped against the jagged edges of the hole, beginning to force its way into our ruined prison. It was impossibly large, covered in a dark, chitinous plating, ending in wickedly sharp talons. This was the colossal insect I had glimpsed in the vision, or a part of it, the intruder. The human above me let out a choked whimper, their eyes squeezing shut in terror. I knew with absolute certainty that if that claw reached us, it would be the end. We would be torn apart, consumed, or simply crushed. A surge of adrenaline, cold and burning, shot through my veins. This was it, the final fight. And for the first time since entering this impossible realm, I felt my own body, my own muscles, stirring with a faint, defiant power. The residual effects of the alien energy, the forced stillness, were breaking. I strained, pushing against the confines of the tunnel with every ounce of strength I possessed. My muscles screamed in protest, unused to exertion after the long suspension, but I ignored the pain. I needed to move. I needed to escape. The claw continued its inexorable descent, its talons tearing at the dark material of our prison, emitting an even louder shriek of metal on rock. The sickly green light from above cast grotesque, dancing shadows across the tunnel. I felt a slight give. The jagged edge of the fractured tunnel, weakened by the attack, yielded a fraction of an inch under my desperate strain. It was enough. With a gasp that was half scream, half grunt of effort, I managed to free my right arm. It was stiff, aching, but free. I immediately pressed my hand against the cold, smooth wall, trying to push myself forward or backward, anything to escape the impending doom. The claw was almost upon us. I could feel the faint tremor of its approach, the heat emanating from its alien body. "Move," I choked out, the word a ragged whisper, a ghost of sound in the still oppressive silence of the tunnel. "Fight." The other human, spurred by my struggle, by the immediate threat, opened their eyes. They looked at me, then at the descending claw, a desperate flicker of understanding crossing their face. They too began to strain, to fight against their own confinement, their uninjured hand twitching, pushing. The claw scraped violently, and a shower of sparks erupted from the ceiling as its immense talons finally broke through the last layer of obstruction, beginning to widen the hole. A low, triumphant growl echoed from above. With a final, desperate heave, I pushed with my feet, strained with my freed arm, and felt my body shift. The fractured material of the tunnel, groaning under the immense pressure, finally gave way. My left arm, then my torso, was free. I was still pinned from the waist down, but I could move, I could twist. I looked up at the other human, still partially trapped. "Grab my hand," I croaked, trying to extend my own. My voice was raspy, barely audible, but the urgency was clear. They saw my outstretched hand, and their face, even in its terror, held a glimmer of hope. They struggled, their fingers reaching, straining, but they were too far, too confined. The claw descended further, its shadows engulfing us. Its talons were mere inches from our faces. I had to act now. With a desperate, almost suicidal lunge, ignoring the pain and the still immobile lower half of my body, I twisted my torso, straining to reach them. My fingers brushed against something, not the smooth, dark material of the tunnel, but cloth, the other human's sleeve. I clawed at it, my hand closing around the fabric, pulling with all the strength I could muster. The human above me cried out, a sound that was barely a whimper but full of raw terror and desperation. They pulled too, their own fingers scrabbling against the slick, smooth surface of their fractured prison, trying to gain purchase. The immense claw from above descended, its wicked talons casting long, grotesque shadows over us, now mere inches from our faces. I could feel the heat radiating from its monstrous body, the rank, metallic smell of its skin. "Pull," I rasped, my voice hoarse, a desperate command. "Hard." With a united, agonizing effort, we both strained. The fabric of the human's sleeve stretched, threatening to tear, but it held. Their body, already partially dislodged from the secondary fracture, groaned against its remaining restraints. There was a sickening crack, not of bone, but of the fractured alien material giving way. With a final, desperate heave, the other humans slid free from their smaller prison, tumbling down towards me. I caught them, or rather, they tumbled into my still partially trapped form, a tangled mess of limbs. Their body was surprisingly light, slender, and for a fleeting moment I was aware of the warmth of another living human being against me. But there was no time for relief. The claw, sensing its prey, plunged deeper into the opening, its talons tearing at the edges of the tunnel with a hideous shriek. "Up!" I yelled, pushing the other human towards the gaping hole. "Go." My lower body was still pinned, but I had enough leverage to shove them. They scrambled, their injured hands scraping against the jagged edges of the opening, their legs flailing. The green light from above intensified, illuminating their desperate ascent. Just as they reached the edge of the hole, their fingers found purchase, and with a powerful heave, they hauled themselves up and out, vanishing from my sight. Now it was just me. The claw filled the opening, its enormous talons twitching, preparing to strike. Its multifaceted eyes glowing with a malevolent green light focused on me, a single, insignificant anomaly in its path. I could feel its hot, foul breath on my face. A surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline coursed through me. My body, though still screaming in protest, responded. I pushed against the buckled wall of the tunnel, my feet scrabbling for purchase, desperate for leverage. The material groaned, stressed to its limit. With a final, guttural roar that felt like it tore my throat, I wrenched my lower body free. It was a searing pain, like being ripped in half, but I was free. I scrambled backward out of the immediate strike zone of the claw, landing hard on the floor of the now larger, ruined transport chamber. The massive talons followed, scraping and tearing, digging into the very spot where I had been moments before. A shower of dark, shimmering fragments rained down around me. I didn't wait. My legs, stiff and unused, still responded. I crawled, then stumbled, then managed to push myself into a half-run, half-scramble away from the monstrous intruder. The tunnel, once our prison, was now a jagged, dark cavern, lit by the furious red cracks in its walls and the sickly green light pouring in from the hole above. "Hey!" A voice, thin and reedy but unmistakably human, called out from somewhere above. "Over here." I looked up, my eyes sweeping frantically through the gloom. The other human was perched precariously on a jagged outcropping of the alien material, higher up in what remained of our transport. They were holding a hand out to me, their face pale, streaked with dirt and blood, but their eyes were burning with fierce determination. I pushed myself towards the outcropping, scrambling up the precarious, fractured surfaces. The alien material, once impossibly smooth, was now a chaotic mess of sharp edges and unstable ledges. The ground beneath me groaned, threatening to give way. The monstrous claw continued to tear at the opening, widening it further, its growl echoing like thunder in the confined space. I reached the outcropping, my fingers gripping the rough, fractured edges. The other human leaned down, extending their arm, their hand firm. I grabbed it, and with a desperate pull, they hauled me up beside them onto the relative safety of the ledge. We huddled there, catching our breath, pressed against the cold, dark wall. From our new vantage point, we could see the full extent of the damage. The transport tunnel was indeed a ruin, ripped open like a tin can. The massive claw continued to tear at the opening, its entire upper body now visible. It was a truly grotesque sight, a segmented, chitinous carapace, dark green and black, covered in spines and glowing emerald eyes. It resembled some terrifying hybrid of a praying mantis and a scorpion, but on a colossal, impossible scale. Its proboscis, which I'd seen in the vision, was still extended like a grotesque snorkel, reaching further into the void. This creature wasn't just attacking, it was feeding. The sickly green light that permeated the area, I now realized, emanated directly from its body, a baleful glow that cast everything in an unnatural, predatory hue. The air was thick with the metallic scent of ozone and something else, something acrid and organic, a smell that turned my stomach. The creature's growl intensified, a low rumble that vibrated through the very fabric of our sanctuary. Its multifaceted eyes, now clearly visible, swiveled, scanning the ruined transport. It was looking for us. Down, the other human whispered, their voice raspy, a desperate plea. Hide. I nodded, my heart hammering against my ribs. There was a deeper fissure in the outcropping, a dark, narrow crevice that seemed to lead deeper into the wreckage, away from the immediate threat. It was a tight squeeze, but it was our only option. We slid down one after the other into the crevice. It was dark, almost completely black, but the faint, angry red light from the fractured walls still permeated the space, casting a dim, flickering illumination. The smell of ozone and burnt metal was stronger here, mingling with the creature's acrid scent. We pressed ourselves against the cold, jagged surfaces, our bodies barely fitting. The sounds of the creature tearing at the transport above us were muffled here, but still terrifyingly clear. We could feel the vibrations through the rock, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of its immense body. "Are you okay?" the other human whispered, their voice trembling. I nodded, then remembered they couldn't see me clearly in the dark. "Yes, you." "My head's nothing broken, I think." They paused, then added, "Thank you, you saved me." "We saved each other," I replied, the words feeling clumsy, inadequate in the face of everything that had happened. "What's your name?" "Jasper," they said. "Jasper Thorne." Sarah Jensen." We held onto the names like anchors, fragile but essential in the chaotic sea of our new reality. Jasper, Sarah, human, real. What is this place?" Jasper asked, his voice barely a breath, full of the same bewildered terror I felt. "I don't know," I admitted. "A facility, some kind of alien processing center." The sentinel was a doorway. Jasper was silent for a moment, then let out a shaky, disbelieving laugh. "Right, an alien processing center, and I thought I was just having a bad acid trip." He chuckled again, a desperate, hollow sound. "Seriously, though, you saw that thing, the stuff they were doing to us?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see. The memories, the data, they were taking us apart, integrating us into their network, I think. A shudder ran through Jasper's body. My God, I felt it too. I thought I was going insane. Flashes of places I'd never seen, feelings I'd never felt, my own memories, they felt like they were slipping away. They were, I confirmed, a fresh wave of dread washing over me. I fought it. I held onto what I could. The rhythmic sounds of the creature above us continued, a constant, grating reminder of our precarious situation. It was still tearing, still feeding. "What do we do?" Jasper asked, his voice raw with despair. "We're trapped in a broken, whatever this is, with that thing outside." "We figure it out," I said, my own voice firmer than I felt. The climber's instinct, the need to analyze the situation to find a way forward, was kicking in. That attack, it created an opportunity. It disrupted whatever hold they had on us. We need to find a way out of here, out of this entire structure. "The structure?" Jasper echoed, his tone skeptical. "It's like nothing I've ever seen. It's impossible." "It's alien," I clarified, "but it's still a physical place. There has to be a way." I paused, taking a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "Did you see anything before everything went dark when the intruder hit?" Jasper thought for a moment. Just chaos. The whole space was swirling, and those other bodies, they were just disappearing, dissolving. I think some of them were already gone before the blast hit. I saw that too, I murmured, a chill running down my spine. The image of the fading, dissolving forms was burned into my mind. They were being absorbed, processed. So, if the facility shut down or rerouted, like you said, Jasper continued, thinking aloud, does that mean we're not being processed anymore? Is it safe? Safe from them, maybe, I replied, gesturing vaguely upwards with my head towards the growling sounds, but not from it. We lapsed into silence, listening to the monster above. It seemed to be settling, its movements becoming less frantic, more deliberate. The vibrations lessened slightly. Was it consuming something? The thought was sickening. We need to move, I whispered after a few minutes, when the sounds seemed to indicate the creature was momentarily occupied. We can't stay here. It'll find us. Where do we go? Jasper asked, his voice laced with fear. Deeper into this transport, I suggested. It's a tunnel. It has to lead somewhere. Maybe a service access, a maintenance shaft, something not meant for specimens. Jasper hesitated, then nodded. Okay, lead the way, Sarah. Carefully, painfully, we began to move, inching our way deeper into the fractured crevice. The red light from the cracks in the surrounding material was our only guide, casting a macabre, flickering glow on our path. The tunnel twisted and turned, narrowing in some places, widening in others. The walls were a jagged mess, sharp edges and broken shards of the dark, smooth alien material. My muscles ached with every movement, and Jasper, with his cut forehead and overall pallor, looked equally worse for wear. But a shared sense of urgency, a desperate will to survive, propelled us forward. As we navigated the wreckage, I started to notice things. This wasn't just a simple tunnel. It was incredibly complex. There were conduits, bundles of glowing filaments encased in transparent, crystalline sheaths, running along the walls, some severed and sparking with faint, errant energies. There were small, recessed panels, their intricate etchings now fractured and broken, but clearly designed for access. This was a mechanism, an active part of the colossal alien machine. Look, Jasper whispered, pointing to a section of the wall where the dark material had completely peeled away, revealing an inner layer. Beneath the dark shell, the internal structure was revealed. It was a dense lattice of the same faint blue light, like frozen lightning, embedded in a translucent crystalline matrix. It pulsed with a very slow, almost imperceptible rhythm, a faint echo of the immense power that had once coursed through it. It was like seeing the veins of a living, mechanical organism. This whole thing is alive, I breathed, the realization chilling me to the bone. Or it was. It's like a giant nerve network. And it's broken, Jasper added, gesturing to the severed conduits. Whatever hit us, it did a lot of damage. We continued to move, carefully stepping over debris, avoiding jagged edges. The air in this deeper section of the transport was slightly cooler, and the acrid smell of the intruder was less pronounced, replaced by the faint, sterile scent of ozone and something earthy, almost mineral. After what felt like an eternity, the crevice opened into a slightly wider but still confined chamber. It was circular, its walls smooth and unbroken, unlike the fractured tunnel we had just navigated. The reddish light here was softer, more diffuse, emanating from the walls themselves, illuminating a single feature in the center of the chamber. It was a pedestal, a low circular platform of the same dark, smooth material rising about a foot from the floor. And on top of it, encased in a shimmering, translucent force field, floated an object. It was a sphere perfectly symmetrical, about the size of a human head. It glowed with a soft, internal blue light pulsing gently like a contained star. Its surface was covered in the same intricate geometric etchings I had seen on the colossal structures in the void. It hummed with a low, resonant frequency, a sound that seemed to bypass my ears and vibrate directly within my chest. "What is that?" Jasper whispered, awe and fear battling in his voice. "I don't know," I replied, my gaze fixed on the sphere, "but it's powerful." The hum was growing, a subtle vibration that hinted at immense, contained energy. It felt important. As we watched, a faint line of light, one of the intricate etchings on its surface, began to brighten, pulsing with a gentle rhythm. It reminded me of the active cube in the void, the processing units. My head throbbed a familiar pain. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself, expecting the torrent of alien data, the fragmentation of memories, but it didn't come. Instead, a single, sharp image flashed in my mind, a diagram, a complex, three-dimensional representation of a massive, interlocking system, a network of conduits and nodes, all centered around a single, glowing sphere. This sphere. It was a core, a central processing unit, or perhaps a power source. I opened my eyes, gasping. "It's a core," I breathed, the words tumbling out. "A central component, maybe the brain or the heart of this whole system." Jasper looked at me bewildered. "How do you know that?" "A flash," I explained, touching my temple. Like the facility tried to show me something, or the information overload left a residual connection. It's a core, and it's still active. The realization brought a fresh wave of terror. If the core was still active, then the facility wasn't entirely dead. It was merely dormant, perhaps severely damaged, but still capable of functioning. And that meant they could still be a threat. "So what, we just stumbled into the control room?" Jasper asked, his voice incredulous. "Maybe," I said, cautiously approaching the pedestal, my hand outstretched, drawn by an irresistible curiosity. The force field shimmered, pushing against my fingertips with an almost imperceptible pressure. It felt like cool, static electricity. As my fingers grazed the field, a new sensation. The hum intensified dramatically, and the blue light of the sphere flared, then dimmed, then flared again, rapidly. The intricate etchings on its surface began to pulse with a frenetic energy, lines of light chasing each other in dizzying patterns. Then the static sensation at my fingertips became something more. A sharp, almost electric jolt shot up my arm, not painful but startling. And with it, a new influx of data, but this time it was different. It wasn't a chaotic torrent, it was information, targeted, specific. Images flashed through my mind, clear and precise. Schematics, pathways, an intricate map of the entire alien facility superimposed over a holographic projection of the Sentinel. I saw the cylindrical chamber, the vast void, the processing cubes, the floating bodies. And I saw the transport tunnels branching off into myriad directions like arteries from a central heart. And then a new image, a series of escape pods. Small, self-contained units ejected from the main structure in an emergency. Their location, their operational status, all flashed into my mind with crystal clarity. Escape pods, I whispered, the words barely audible. There are escape pods. Jasper stared at me, his eyes wide. What, are you serious? Yes, I said, pulling my hand away from the force field, the images still burning in my mind. The blue sphere settled back into its rhythmic pulse. The facility, it's like a massive ship, and there's a way off. Where? Jasper pressed, his voice filled with a desperate hope. Where are they? Hidden, I replied, the images still fresh in my mind. Deep within the outer layers, emergency exits, but they're not close. We'd have to travel through the main structure, and it's damaged. A new wave of sounds reached us then. Not the growling of the intruder, but a deeper, more resonant vibration. It was the hum of the facility, rising again slowly, gradually from its damaged state. It seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, a low, persistent thrum that filled the small chamber. The red cracks in the walls, which had been glowing faintly, now began to pulse with a more urgent, almost angry light. It's coming back online, I said, a fresh wave of fear washing over me. The facility, it's repairing itself, or trying to. We need to go, Jasper urged, his eyes darting frantically around the small chamber. Now, before they come looking for us. I nodded. The core had given me a partial map, a potential route. It was dangerous, almost suicidal, but it was a route, a chance. Which way? Jasper asked, looking at the smooth, unbroken walls of the core chamber. There were no obvious exits, no doors. I concentrated, recalling the schematic that had been downloaded into my mind. The escape pod locations were precise. The pathway to them, though complex, was also clear. I pointed to a section of the wall to our left. Here, there's an access point, not obvious. I walked over, my hand sweeping across the smooth surface. The core's hum intensified slightly as I approached, as if responding to my intent. I pressed my palm against the wall at a specific point indicated in the mental diagram. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in the still reverberating chamber, a section of the wall slid inward, then sideways, revealing a dark, narrow passage. You're really doing this, aren't you? Jasper asked, a strange mix of fear and excitement in his voice. We don't have a choice, I said, stepping into the dark passage. It's either this, or wait for the monster, or wait for them to finish processing us. Jasper followed, his movements hesitant but determined. The passage was unlit, much darker than the core chamber, but the faint red glow from the cracks in the main facility still provided a ghostly illumination from distant sections. This new passage was narrower than the transport tunnel, forcing us to move in single file. It felt less like a natural part of the structure and more like a hidden service corridor. The air here was still and stale, smelling faintly of old metal and dry dust. As we moved, I tried to make sense of the mental map to orient myself. The images were still incredibly vivid, an almost constant overlay on my vision. It was overwhelming, a deluge of alien information threatening to push out my own thoughts. I had to focus, to filter. Stay close, I whispered to Jasper, my voice barely audible. I can sense the pathways, but it's not easy to navigate. We pressed on, moving deeper into the labyrinthine interior of the damaged facility. The rhythmic hum of the core chamber slowly faded behind us, replaced by the faint, distant thrum of the regenerating facility itself. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration, but it was there, a constant reminder that we were still within the alien machine. After what felt like an hour of cautious movement, the passage opened into a larger space. This was not a natural cavern or a service tunnel. This was clearly part of the main processing facility. It was vast, circular, and filled with a dim, ambient blue light, similar to the light I had seen in the initial void, but far dimmer, flickering erratically. The air was cold, damp, and thick with the familiar, sterile smell of ozone. All around us, suspended in the dim blue light, were more of the geometric structures, but these were smaller, more intricate, arranged in complex patterns that resembled colossal alien circuitry. Many of them were cracked, broken, or half dissolved, glowing with intermittent flashes of that furious red light. And between them, suspended like ghostly motes in the dim, flickering light, were more bodies. Hundreds of them, human and alien, animal and unknown. They were all still serene, but many of them were in various states of disarray. Some were slowly dissolving, their forms blurring, their internal light dimming. Others were clearly damaged, ripped apart by the force of the intruder's attack, their fragments drifting slowly in the silent blue void. It was a chilling, macabre scene, a graveyard of lost life caught in the throes of alien destruction. "My God," Jasper breathed, his voice choked with horror. He clutched my arm, his hand trembling. "Look at them, all of them." My gaze swept across the silent, tragic tableau. These were the ones who hadn't made it. The ones who had been too close to the blast, or whose processing had been too far advanced to withstand the sudden shutdown. But even in the horror, I saw something else. The blue light, though dim and flickering, indicated that some functions were still active. The facility was indeed trying to recover, to repair itself. We were walking through a wound, a colossal injury in the body of an alien superorganism. The mental map in my head was still active, guiding me. It showed our path, weaving through these damaged processing chambers, avoiding the more severely damaged sections, towards the outer shell where the escape pods were located. It was a long journey, fraught with peril. "We need to be careful," I whispered. "The facility, it's trying to come back online. If it senses us, if it detects active consciousnesses, it might try to reinitiate processing." Jasper gulped. "Reinitiate, you mean take us apart again?" I nodded grimly, "And we don't want to be here when that happens, especially not in a damaged section. It could be unstable." We began to move, threading our way through the silent, ghostly gallery. We hugged the edges of the chamber, using the larger, broken geometric structures as cover, staying low, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. Our movements were slow, cautious, our eyes constantly scanning the flickering blue light, searching for any sign of movement, any indication that the facility was aware of us. The silence was profound, broken only by the faint, erratic hum of the regenerating facility and the occasional distant creak or groan from the colossal structure. It was a silence that weighed heavily on the soul, a constant reminder of our isolation and vulnerability. As we passed one of the larger, broken geometric structures, a colossal cube that had been split in half, its internal mechanisms exposed like the raw guts of a machine, a new sound reached us. It was faint at first, a metallic skittering coming from somewhere within the broken cube. We froze, pressing ourselves against the nearest intact structure, barely breathing. The skittering grew louder, more distinct, accompanied by a soft, rhythmic clicking. "What's that?" Jasper whispered, his voice tight with fear. My eyes strained, trying to pierce the gloom within the broken cube. Then I saw it, a dark shape moving within the shattered interior. It was smaller than the colossal intruder, but still large, easily the size of a bear. It had multiple spindly legs, a segmented body, and a cluster of glowing green eyes, just like the larger creature. It was a smaller version of the intruder, a drone, a scavenger, or perhaps one of its offspring. It was moving through the wreckage, its glowing eyes scanning its surroundings, its metallic legs clicking against the fractured alien material. It was clearly searching for something, perhaps leftovers from the initial attack or signs of life. Our blood ran cold. The intruder wasn't just a singular monster, it was an ecosystem. We stayed utterly still, frozen in place, barely daring to breathe. The drone was moving slowly, meticulously, its glowing eyes sweeping past our hiding spot, then sweeping back. It was close, too close. I could feel the faint vibrations of its movements through the floor. It was searching. I clenched my jaw, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to regulate my breathing. Any sudden movement, any sound, and we would be spotted. The drone paused, its head tilting slightly, its glowing green eyes fixed on a spot directly across from us, where a small cluster of human bodies lay partially obscured by a shattered panel. It skittered closer, its legs clicking loudly in the profound silence. My eyes darted to Jasper. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror, but he was holding perfectly still. We were both thinking the same thing. It was interested in the bodies. Was it feeding on the dead, or was it looking for living beings? The drone reached the cluster of bodies. It paused again, its head swiveling, its proboscis, a smaller version of the larger creatures, extending slightly. Then, with a quick, jerky motion, it plunged its proboscis into one of the suspended bodies, which immediately began to shimmer and dissolve at an accelerated rate, its internal light dimming, then flickering out. It was draining them, consuming their essence, their energy. A wave of nausea washed over me. This was the true horror of this place, not just alien processing, but alien predation. We were caught between two monsters, the cold, calculating facility and the ravenous, predatory intruder. The drone continued its ghastly meal, draining another body, then another. It was methodical, efficient, completely absorbed in its task. This gave us a precious window. I met Jasper's gaze, conveying my silent intent. We had to move, now. Slowly, carefully, we began to inch our way forward, our movements agonizingly slow, precise. Every scrape of our clothes, every faint sound of our feet against the alien material seemed amplified in the suffocating silence. We crept past the drone, its glowing green eyes oblivious to our presence, focused on its grisly feast. Just as we thought we were clear, just as we reached the edge of the chamber and the entrance to another narrow passage, a new sound erupted from the deepest parts of the facility. A colossal groan, a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated through the entire structure, shaking the very ground beneath us. The blue ambient light in the chamber flared, then dimmed, then pulsed with an erratic intensity. The red cracks in the damaged geometric structures glowed brighter, more violently. The drone, startled, pulled its proboscis from its victim, its glowing green eyes snapping up, scanning the chamber, searching for the source of the disturbance. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Jasper's arm and pulling him into the narrow passage. We stumbled, our legs still stiff and aching, but the surge of pure terror lent us unnatural speed. Behind us, the drone shrieked, a high-pitched, metallic screech, clearly having detected our movement. The clicking of its many legs intensified, growing rapidly louder as it pursued us. The passage was narrow, twisting, and dark, lit only by the faint, flickering red glow from the cracks in the main facility. I relied on the mental map, pushing us forward, trying to navigate the complex pathways. The drone was fast, terrifyingly fast, its screeching growl echoing off the smooth, dark walls, seeming to come from all directions. "Where are we going?" Jasper gasped, his breath ragged, his voice strained. "Escape pods," I yelled back, my own lungs burning, my throat raw. "Outer shell, we have to get there." We rounded a corner, the passage briefly widening into a small, alcove-like space before narrowing again. Just as we passed the alcove, a flash of movement. Another drone. This one was larger, its carapace even darker, its glowing green eyes more numerous, more malevolent. It had been lying in wait, hidden in the shadows. It lunged, its spindly legs propelling it forward with terrifying speed, its proboscis extending, a sickening, barbed spear aiming directly for Jasper's back. "Jasper, look out!" I screamed, shoving him forward with all my might. He stumbled, falling to his knees just as the drone's proboscis sliced through the air where his head had been moments before, burying itself with a sickening thud into the dark, smooth wall behind him. The alien material hissed, emitting a thin wisp of acrid smoke. The drone snarled, its metallic body writhing, its legs scrabbling against the wall, trying to free its impaled weapon. This was our chance. "Go, go," I yelled, pulling Jasper back to his feet. We sprinted, scrambling through the narrow passage, the sounds of the first drone still pursuing us from behind, the second drone still struggling to free itself from the wall. We were caught between two deadly predators. The mental map in my head was flashing, indicating a sharp turn ahead, then a descent into a deeper layer of the facility. It was a risky path, leading us away from the current danger, but potentially into new, unknown threats. "Down," I yelled, seeing the entrance to a vertical shaft ahead, a dark hole in the floor of the passage. We didn't hesitate. I slid in first, bracing myself, then Jasper followed, sliding down, propelled by gravity and fear. It was a long, dark drop, illuminated only by the faint, flickering red light from above and below. We scraped against the rough, inner surface of the shaft, our clothes tearing, our skin burning. We landed hard in a crumpled heap on a narrow ledge far below. The air here was colder, heavier, and the ubiquitous hum of the facility was now a low, continuous drone, deeper and more powerful than before. The red cracks in the walls were less frequent here, replaced by subtle, rhythmic pulses of the blue light that defined the main structure. We were moving deeper into the undamaged, fully active sections of the facility. "Are you hurt?" I gasped, pushing myself up, pain shooting through my bruised body. Jasper groaned, sitting up, holding his head. "Just bruised. My head is ringing. That was close." He looked at me, his eyes wide and haunted. "What are those things?" "Intruders," I said, stating the obvious. "They're attacking the facility, and they're hunting us." "They're everywhere," Jasper corrected, a note of despair in his voice. "We can't outrun them all." He was right. The facility was a vast, sprawling organism, and the intruders seemed to be equally pervasive. Our chances of navigating this labyrinth, escaping the drones, and finding the escape pods seemed infinitesimally small. But despair was a luxury we couldn't afford. I consulted the mental map again, focusing, trying to make sense of the overwhelming information. The path to the escape pods was still clear, but it was long, winding through numerous chambers and conduits. We were now in a section of the facility that seemed to be dedicated to power generation or distribution. Colossal conduits, thick as sequoia trees, pulsed with a blinding blue light, running along the walls, disappearing into the darkness. The air crackled with raw energy, and the metallic tang of ozone was almost overwhelming. "This way," I said, pointing down a narrow pathway that snaked between the massive conduits. "We need to move through this section quickly. It's active." We moved with renewed caution, our footsteps barely audible against the deep hum of the conduits. The sheer scale of this place was mind-boggling. The conduits were vast, smooth, radiating an intense heat that warmed our cold, bruised bodies. The blue light they emitted was so bright it cast our shadows into sharp relief, distorted and elongated against the curved walls. As we navigated the pathways, I became aware of another sensation. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration under my feet, a rhythmic tremor that seemed to emanate from the very core of the conduits. It was the hum of the facility, but here it was almost overwhelming, a living, breathing pulse of immense power. Then a new element. We approached a section where the conduit walls were not smooth but latticed. Through the lattice I could see glimpses of a vast cavernous space, a pulsating heart of pure energy. Within, immense columns of solidified blue light rose from unseen depths, twisting and merging, their surfaces rippling like liquid glass. The air inside the lattice crackled with an almost painful intensity, visible as shimmering waves of heat. It was the raw power of the facility, condensed, channeled, and radiating an immense, terrifying force. "What is that?" Jasper whispered, his voice barely audible over the growing hum. He pressed himself against the conduit as if trying to merge with the dark, cool material, away from the sheer intensity of the energy. "Power," I breathed, the word feeling inadequate. "This is where it generates and distributes its energy. The core we saw, it's feeding all of this." The mental map in my head now showed this area as a nexus, a central hub from which countless energy lines radiated outwards. It was the circulatory system of the alien machine. The pathway continued, winding further into this power-dense section. The air grew thicker with ozone, stinging our nostrils, making our eyes water. The heat radiating from the conduits intensified, pressing in on us, making it difficult to breathe. Our skin tingled, a constant low-level electrical current running through us. "We need to be fast," I urged, pulling Jasper forward. "This isn't a place to linger. The power surges, they could be dangerous. And if the facility is trying to repair itself, this place will be even more volatile." We pushed on, our footsteps echoing faintly against the rising hum. The path was uneven, strewn with debris, shards of alien material, twisted metallic filaments that still sparked with errant energy. It was clear that even this robust section had suffered damage during the intruder's attack. The blue light from the conduits pulsed, sometimes erratically, sometimes with a slow, powerful beat that felt like a heartbeat. The mental map in my head was a blessing and a curse. It showed me the optimal path, the shortest route to the escape pods, but it also flooded my mind with the sheer complexity and raw power of the alien machine. I could feel the flow of energy, the minute fluctuations, the damage, the repair protocols initiating. It was an overwhelming symphony of alien mechanics and biology, threatening to drown my own thoughts. Suddenly, the path ahead narrowed significantly, funneling us towards a single circular opening in the massive conduit wall. It was dark, a black void against the brilliant blue light, and no larger than a standard ventilation shaft. This way, I said, pointing. It's a maintenance access. It bypasses a more heavily damaged section. Jasper eyed the opening with trepidation. You're sure it looks tight? It's our only option without going back towards the drones, I insisted. The mental map was clear. This was the safest, albeit uncomfortable, route. I squeezed into the opening first, feeling the smooth, cool material press against my body. It was a tight fit, forcing me to crawl, but it was just wide enough. The shaft angled downwards, then twisted, becoming a winding tunnel. Jasper followed, his grunts of effort echoing in the confined space. The air in the shaft was still heavy, and the blue light from the main conduits was now a distant glow, barely penetrating the darkness. It was a welcome reprieve from the intense heat and crackling energy, but the claustrophobia was immediate and suffocating. We crawled in silence, the rhythmic scrape of our clothes and the occasional thud of our bodies against the shaft walls the only sounds. My mind, now less bombarded by the raw power of the conduits, could focus more on the mental map. It showed that this shaft was long, twisting through several layers of the facility, eventually leading to a transfer station that would take us closer to the outer shell. After what felt like an eternity, the shaft began to widen. We could see a faint light ahead, not the brilliant blue of the conduits, nor the sickly green of the intruder, but a soft, almost milky white. It was a calming light, a stark contrast to the aggressive energies we had just navigated. We emerged from the shaft into a long, rectangular corridor. The walls, floor, and ceiling were made of a pristine, pearlescent white material, smooth and unblemished, glowing with an internal, soft light. The air here was cool, clean, and utterly silent. It felt peaceful, too peaceful. "What is this place?" Jasper whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and suspicion. "I don't know," I replied, my gaze sweeping the corridor. "It's not in the areas of power generation nor the processing voids. It looks different." The mental map indicated this was a tertiary access corridor, a less used pathway, likely untouched by the intruder's attack. It stretched far into the distance, perfectly straight, perfectly empty. "It's like a medical bay," Jasper mused, his hand reaching out to touch the glowing wall. "Or a laboratory." As his fingers brushed the pearlescent surface, a subtle change occurred. The soft white light brightened, and a faint, almost imperceptible hum resonated from within the walls. Intricate crystalline patterns, previously invisible, now flickered into existence, tracing complex geometric shapes across the corridor. They were similar to the etchings on the central core, but far more delicate, more ornate. And then a new set of data streamed into my mind from the mental link. It wasn't a map or schematic this time, but a series of images, fragments of alien understanding. I saw the geometric patterns as representations of complex biological functions, of healing, of synthesis, of growth. This corridor wasn't just an access point. It was a conduit for cellular regeneration, a pathway for raw life force. "This place, it's about life," I murmured, the words feeling profound, strange. "Healing, preservation, it's part of their biological systems, I think." Jasper stared at me, his cut forehead glowing slightly in the white light. "Their biological systems, are they living?" "This entire facility," I said, a shiver running down my spine, "it's not just a machine, it's a hybrid. Part machine, part organism, like the core, the neural network of this colossal being." The thought was terrifying, almost incomprehensible. We weren't just in an alien structure, we were inside a living, mechanical god. We continued down the corridor, the silence oppressive, the soft white light casting us in an ethereal glow. The hum remained, a gentle vibration that seemed to resonate deep within my bones. With every step, I felt a subtle shift in the air, a faint, almost imperceptible current. It felt like walking through a living vein, a conduit for some unknown vital fluid. "It feels strange," Jasper whispered, his voice hushed, "like it's watching us." I felt it too, a pervasive, non-hostile awareness. The facility, in its silent way, was observing us, recognizing our presence, perhaps even assessing us. As we walked, I noticed something else. The small cut on Jasper's forehead, which had been trickling blood, seemed to be closing. The edges of the wound were drawing together, the blood drying, fading, as if hastened by some unseen force. The pallor on his face, too, seemed to lessen, a faint blush returning to his cheeks. I looked at my own hands. The scrapes and bruises from our frantic escape, which had been painful and raw, were now merely faint marks. The throbbing ache in my muscles had subsided. We were healing. "It's healing us," I whispered, awe mixing with apprehension. "This place, it's repairing our bodies just like it's repairing itself." Jasper touched his forehead, his eyes widening as he felt the smooth, almost completely healed skin. "My God, it's incredible." But the realization also brought a chilling thought. If it could heal, it could also manipulate. It could dissect. It could process. This healing might just be another facet of its inscrutable alien agenda. The mental map in my head now updated, showing this corridor as a bioregeneration pathway, a system designed to maintain and restore biological integrity. It explained the healing, but it also confirmed that the facility was aware of our biological presence. After another long stretch, the pearlescent corridor ended abruptly, opening into a vastly different space. This was a circular chamber, vast and dark, but permeated by a faint, shimmering field of iridescent green light that seemed to pulse and flow like liquid within the air. It was a beautiful, ethereal sight, but also deeply unsettling. And then I saw the true nature of the chamber. It was filled with spheres, hundreds, thousands of them of varying sizes, floating silently in the shimmering green light. Some were tiny like marbles, others massive, the size of small planets. All were encased in the same shimmering, translucent material, and all pulsed with faint, internal lights of myriad colors: reds, blues, yellows, purples. "What in the—" Jasper gasped, his voice trailing off into silence. The mental map instantly translated this chamber's function. It was a data archive. These spheres were not planets, but colossal repositories of information. Each sphere, depending on its size, contained vast quantities of recorded experience, memories, and data, harvested from countless beings across countless worlds. The shimmering green light was a pervasive data field, constantly circulating information, updating, cross-referencing. This was the facility's library, its history, its collective consciousness. As we stepped further into the chamber, the green light intensified slightly, and I felt a familiar pressure behind my eyes. The mental link was being bombarded again, not with schematics or pathways, but with raw, unorganized information, a dizzying torrent of images, sounds, and emotions. I saw glimpses of alien worlds, vibrant with life, utterly foreign. I saw strange creatures, different from the intruder, moving with elegant, impossible grace. I saw the immense, silent void as seen from an impossibly distant, alien perspective. I saw fragments of human lives, familiar faces, forgotten moments, all swirling together in a chaotic kaleidoscope of experience. It was overwhelming. It was every thought, every feeling, every memory from every being ever processed by the facility. A universal tapestry of consciousness stretching across eons. Sarah, Jasper's voice cut through the mental static, his hand shaking my arm. Are you okay? You're glowing. I looked down. A faint blue luminescence now emanated from my skin, flickering erratically like a volatile internal energy. The alien data was flowing through me, channeling, filtering. It's the archive, I managed to choke out, my voice strained. It's trying to integrate, to understand us, to understand me. The pressure behind my eyes intensified, threatening to crack my skull. I felt my own memories, my own identity, begin to fragment again, to scatter like dust in a cosmic wind. The sense of being utterly absorbed, completely erased, returned with a horrifying vengeance. This was worse than the processing cubes. This was the raw, unfiltered truth of the alien collective consciousness, threatening to devour my very soul. We need to go, Jasper urged, his voice filled with panic. He was pulling at me, trying to drag me away from the pervasive green light. Now it's doing something to you. I knew he was right. I was dissolving, not physically, but mentally. The sheer volume of information was annihilating my individual consciousness. I had to break the connection. With a superhuman effort, I focused on the mental map. Escape pods, outer shell, escape, my one singular goal. I pushed back against the deluge of data, focusing all my will on that single, clear objective. The mental link, surprisingly, responded. The chaotic flow of data receded slightly, replaced by a surge of clarity. The path to the escape pods, now more detailed than before, stood out like a beacon in the mental fog. The archive, in its attempt to integrate me, had inadvertently given me an even more precise navigational tool. This way, I gasped, pointing towards a darker section of the chamber where the green light seemed less intense. There's a passage, hidden. I stumbled forward, Jasper still holding onto my arm, half dragging me. The blue glow on my skin slowly faded as we moved away from the intense data field, but the throbbing pain in my head remained, a painful echo of the information overload. We reached the hidden passage. It was not a door, but a shimmering, almost invisible membrane of light, pulsating faintly. The mental map indicated it was a data-shielded egress designed to allow passage while blocking unwanted information transfer. I reached out, pushing my hand against the membrane. It yielded, feeling like cool, highly viscous liquid. I plunged through, Jasper following close behind. We found ourselves in another narrow corridor, this one dimly lit by an almost imperceptible ambient gray light. The air was cool and still. The oppressive hum of the facility was now a very distant thrum, a vibration felt more in the bones than heard with the ears. We were moving into the outer layers. The mental map showed a series of intersecting corridors, branching paths, and then a network of larger conduits leading to the final destination, the escape pods. The escape pods, they're close now, I whispered, my voice hoarse. But there are obstacles, automated defenses, and the facility is trying to reactivate them. Jasper nodded, his face grim. Of course there are, nothing is ever easy here. As we progressed, the corridors became less refined, more utilitarian. The walls were made of a dull, dark gray alloy marked with occasional alien glyphs. Small, flickering panels of light set into the ceiling provided sporadic illumination, casting long, wavering shadows. Then we heard it, a faint, rhythmic thump thump thump, mechanical, heavy, and growing steadily louder. It was coming from ahead. "What's that?" Jasper whispered, his hand instinctively reaching for mine. I consulted the mental map. It showed the next major intersection, and superimposed over it a flashing red warning icon, automated defense unit reactivating. Automated defenses, I said, my heart sinking. The facility is bringing them back online. They were dormant after the attack, but now. The thump 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 grew into a booming reverberation, shaking the very floor beneath our feet. A flickering red light now emanated from the end of the corridor, pulsing with each heavy step. We rounded the corner and saw it. It was a colossal automaton, a multi-legged insectoid construct, far larger and more heavily armored than the drones we had encountered before. Its carapace was a dull metallic black streaked with glowing red lines that pulsed with stored energy. Instead of a proboscis, it had a cluster of formidable, segmented arms, each ending in a different weapon: a cutting laser, a crushing claw, a high-frequency sonic emitter. Its head was a single, massive optical sensor, glowing with an angry red light, swiveling slowly, scanning the corridor. It was a guardian, and it was awake. "Back!" I yelled, pulling Jasper backwards around the corner, out of its line of sight. We pressed ourselves against the cold metal wall, barely breathing, listening to the heavy thump 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 as the automaton slowly advanced down the corridor. Its red optical sensor swept past our hiding place, then continued its methodical patrol. The mental map showed that this particular defense unit was designed for perimeter lockdown and intruder neutralization. It was heavily armored, difficult to disable, and armed with non-lethal but incapacitating and lethal weaponry. Its primary objective was to prevent unauthorized egress. That meant us. "We can't fight that thing," Jasper whispered, his voice trembling. "It'll tear us apart." "I know," I agreed, my mind racing. The mental map also showed its patrol patterns, its sensor range, its energy signature. There had to be a weakness, a blind spot. The automaton reached the end of the corridor, paused, its red light intensifying, then slowly began to turn, preparing to retrace its steps. "Okay," I breathed, forcing myself to calm down. "It has a blind spot directly below it when it's turning, and its thermal sensors are weaker on its underside." "You're thinking we go under it?" Jasper asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. "It's too heavily armored from the top," I explained, pointing to a series of maintenance panels set into the floor of the corridor just past the corner. "There's a service duct here. If we can get into it, we can get past the automaton and continue on our path." The automaton was still turning, its heavy thump 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 momentarily muffled as its massive body shifted. This was our chance. "Now," I yelled, pulling Jasper forward. We sprinted around the corner, scrambling towards the maintenance panels. The automaton was still completing its turn, its red sensor slowly sweeping the opposite side of the corridor. We had a few precious seconds. I reached the panels first, frantically searching for a release mechanism. The mental map showed a manual override, a small recessed button. My fingers, still aching, fumbled across the cold metal surface, searching. The thump 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 was now directly behind us, growing louder. The red light of the optical sensor was beginning to sweep towards our position. Found it, I gasped, my finger pressing a small, almost invisible indentation. With a hiss of compressed air, a section of the floor panels slid sideways, revealing a dark, narrow shaft beneath. Go, go, I urged, shoving Jasper into the opening. He didn't hesitate, plunging into the darkness. I followed, sliding in just as the automaton completed its turn. Its massive optical sensor swiveled, its red light sweeping directly over the spot where we had been moments before. A high-pitched metallic shriek ripped through the air above us. The automaton had detected us. It lumbered forward, its heavy legs impacting the floor with furious force, causing the entire shaft to vibrate violently. We could hear the heavy thump-thump-thump directly overhead, the metallic shriek intensifying as the automaton tried to locate us, its weapons powering up. We crawled as fast as we could through the dark, cramped shaft, the vibrations above us threatening to dislodge the ceiling panels. The air was thick with the smell of dust and old machinery. It knows we're here, Jasper yelled, his voice strained. It can't get in, I shouted back, relying on the mental map that confirmed the shaft was structurally sound, reinforced against intrusion. It's too big for this access point. The automaton above us let out another furious shriek, followed by a searing sound like metal being melted. It was firing its cutting laser, trying to breach the access panel. Sparks and fragments of alien material rained down from the ceiling of the shaft, forcing us to duck, shielding our heads. Keep moving, I yelled, scrambling forward, ignoring the burning fragments. It's buying us time. The shaft twisted and turned, eventually leading us into a larger, horizontal tunnel. This was clearly another major conduit, but instead of energy, it seemed to be designed for transport. Its walls were smooth, curving, and dimly lit by a faint, continuous blue line that ran along its length. This is a rapid transit conduit, I explained, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It leads directly to the outer shell and the escape pods. But as we stumbled into the conduit, the blue line on the wall began to pulse erratically, and a low, resonant hum started to build. The air began to feel charged, and a faint shimmering distortion appeared further down the tunnel. It's activating the transit system, I realized, a fresh wave of urgency washing over me. It's trying to catch us. The conduit was a long, open tunnel with no obvious hiding spots. If the transit system activated, we would be propelled forward at incredible speeds, or worse, caught in the energy field. Run, I yelled, pulling Jasper along. We have to get to the end of the conduit before it fully engages. We sprinted down the conduit, the blue line on the walls now pulsing faster, the hum rising to a deafening roar. The shimmering distortion ahead intensified, becoming a visible wave of energy rushing towards us. It was a propulsion field designed to push things rapidly through the tunnel. We ran with everything we had, our legs burning, our lungs screaming for air. The energy wave was gaining on us, its shimmering edge visibly closer, the roar of the conduit filling our ears, vibrating through our very bones. "We're not going to make it," Jasper gasped, stumbling. I looked ahead. The conduit ended in a vast circular chamber, far larger than any we had seen before. It was an enormous cavern, its walls made of the same dark, smooth alien material, but here they were lined with colossal, intricate glyphs that glowed with a deep, internal red light. And in the center of the chamber, suspended in midair by unseen forces, were the escape pods. There were dozens of them, sleek, teardrop-shaped vessels, metallic silver, each large enough for a single occupant. They hung silently, gleaming in the faint, red light, waiting. "Almost there," I yelled, pulling Jasper, forcing him to keep running. The energy wave was almost upon us, the roar now a physical force, pushing us forward. We burst into the chamber, tumbling forward out of the mouth of the conduit, just as the full force of the propulsion field slammed into the open space. The shimmering energy dissipated harmlessly into the vast chamber, washing over the escape pods, causing them to hum faintly. We lay there, gasping for breath, our bodies aching, our minds reeling from the sheer terror of the chase. We had made it. We were in the escape pod chamber. But our relief was short-lived. The enormous chamber was not empty. From the shadows, from between the suspended escape pods, from hidden crevices in the massive walls, dark shapes began to stir. They were drones, hundreds of them, smaller than the one that had chased us in the processing void, but far more numerous than any we had encountered. They were spindly, multi-legged, their chitinous bodies a glossy black, their numerous eyes glowing with a malevolent green light. They had been lying in wait, hidden in the labyrinthine shadows of the chamber, silent sentinels. And they were waking up. A low, collective clicking sound filled the chamber, growing rapidly louder as they began to move, swarming out of their hiding places, their glowing green eyes fixing on us. Their small, barbed proboscises extended, twitching, sensing our presence. "No," Jasper whispered, his voice filled with utter despair. "Not again." This was not an isolated drone nor a single automaton. This was a swarm, an army, and we were trapped in the very heart of their ambush. I looked frantically around the chamber. The escape pods were suspended high above us, unreachable. The conduit we had just exited was the only way in or out, and it was now filled with the pulsating, roaring energy of the active propulsion field. We were cornered. The mental map, which had been so helpful, now flashed with a new, horrifying warning. Egress point compromised. Swarm protocol activated. All escape pods locked. Locked. The drones were closing in, their clicking legs creating a terrifying symphony of impending doom. Their green eyes gleamed in the red light of the chamber, reflecting our terror. I scrambled to my feet, pulling Jasper with me, trying to think, to find a way out, any way. The sheer numbers were overwhelming. There must have been thousands of them, filling every available space, creating a living, undulating carpet of chitin and glowing eyes. Suddenly, a new, massive presence entered the chamber, not from the conduit, but from a vast, hidden opening in the ceiling of the cavern. It was the colossal intruder, the one that had attacked our transport. It descended slowly, its immense, multi-jointed body filling the space, casting a monstrous shadow across the entire chamber. Its chitinous carapace, dark green and black, was streaked with glowing emerald veins, pulsing with malevolent energy. Its multifaceted eyes, each larger than a human head, swiveled, focusing on us, two tiny specks of life in its vast, predatory domain. Its grotesque proboscis, still extended, twitched. It let out a low, guttural growl, a sound that vibrated through the very bedrock of the facility, causing the escape pods to tremble. This was the master, the queen, the mother of the swarm. The smaller drones in unison began to chant, a high-pitched metallic chittering that resonated with the growl of their colossal leader, creating a cacophony of alien sound that was utterly terrifying. They were praising it, hailing it, their collective hunger palpable. The escape pods suspended above us began to glow with a faint internal blue light. The locking mechanism the mental map showed was a neural interface biometric seal. It required a specific biological signature, an authorized consciousness to activate, and the facility, now partially restored, had activated it, perhaps sensing the presence of a living specimen in a critical area. But who was authorized? The alien engineers, the ones who had captured us? We certainly weren't. The colossal intruder lowered its head, its multifaceted eyes fixed on us, its massive proboscis slowly, deliberately extending, its barbed tip gleaming wickedly in the red light. We were cornered, surrounded by a ravenous swarm, with a colossal predator looming above, and our only escape mechanism locked. "This is it," Jasper whispered, his voice devoid of hope, his eyes wide with fatalistic despair. He stood beside me, trembling but defiant, his gaze meeting the monstrous eyes of the intruder. I stared back at the colossal creature, a surge of adrenaline, cold and pure, rushing through me. Despair was a luxury. Surrender was not an option, not yet. My mind raced, fueled by the desperate need to survive. The mental map, the core, the data archive, the facility itself. The things I had seen, the information I had absorbed. There had to be something, a loophole, a weakness, a way. My eyes swept over the escape pods again, focusing on the blue glow. Neural interface biometric seal. A specific biological signature. Suddenly, a thought, sharp and clear, pierced through the chaos of my fear. The facility had been processing countless species, integrating their biology, their consciousness, into its own vast network. The core was the heart of that process, and I, through the mental link, had touched that core. I had absorbed its data, its schematics, its essence. Could my signature, altered by the facility, be enough? Had I become authorized? It was a desperate gamble, a suicidal hope, but it was all we had. "Stay with me, Jasper," I gasped, my voice barely a whisper but firm. "We're not done yet." I looked up at the closest escape pod, still suspended high above us, its blue light pulsating. The colossal intruder was still lowering itself, its proboscis now only meters away, its shadow enveloping us. The swarm of drones was closing in, a chittering tide of death. I pushed Jasper behind me, stepping forward, my eyes fixed on the escape pod. The mental map showed the trajectory of the pods, their release mechanisms, their intended destinations. And it also showed the neural interface biometric requirements. It was a complex sequence, a specific pattern of thought, a particular neural frequency encoded by the facility. I closed my eyes for a split second, taking a deep, shuddering breath, trying to clear my mind. I had to focus. I had to remember the influx of data from the core, the feeling of connection to the alien machine. I had to become the interface. The colossal intruder let out a triumphant growl, its proboscis now hovering directly over us, its barbed tip glinting, ready to strike. The swarm of drones was mere meters away, their clicking legs a deafening assault on my ears. I opened my eyes, meeting the malevolent gaze of the colossal creature. Then I focused every ounce of my will, every fragment of the alien data I had absorbed, every conscious thought on the nearest escape pod. I imagined the biometric seal, the neural frequency, the precise pattern of thought required. I channeled the facility's own essence, its cold, calculating logic, its desire for preservation through my altered consciousness. For a moment, nothing happened. The intruder growled louder, its proboscis beginning its final downward thrust. The drones shrieked, preparing to lunge. Then a flicker. The blue light on the nearest escape pod intensified dramatically, flaring into a brilliant pulse. A soft hiss emanated from its base, and a small, circular hatch, previously invisible, retracted inward. It was unlocked. "Jasper, now," I screamed, pointing to the open hatch. "Jump." He stared, his eyes wide, disbelief battling with a surge of desperate hope. The drones, startled by the sudden flash of light, paused their advance, their chittering momentarily silenced. The colossal intruder, sensing the breach, let out a furious, deafening shriek. Its proboscis, instead of striking us, whipped towards the open escape pod hatch, trying to close it, to destroy it. But it was too late. Jasper, galvanized by my desperate cry, by the undeniable proof of the unlocked pod, sprang forward. He launched himself, scrambling, his fingers desperately clawing at the sleek metal surface of the pod. He swung himself inside, vanishing into the dark interior. "Go launch," I screamed, still channeling the mental energy, the specific sequence of thought, into the pod. The mental map showed a secondary command to initiate launch. The pod hummed, a low, powerful vibration that resonated through the entire chamber. Its blue light intensified further, and the small hatch began to close, slowly, inexorably. The colossal intruder's proboscis slammed against the closing hatch with a deafening thud, its barbs scraping against the metallic surface, trying to force it open. The smaller drones, recovering from their surprise, surged forward, a living wave of razor-sharp legs and glowing green eyes heading directly for me. I was still standing in the center of the chamber, exposed, channeling all my focus on the pod, on its launch. I was not going to make it. Then, through the closing hatch, a hand reached out, Jasper's hand. "Sarah, grab my hand," he yelled, his voice strained, desperate. "Come on." It was a reckless, impossible gesture. The pod was closing, the intruder was attacking, the swarm was almost upon me. But I looked at his outstretched hand, and in his terrified eyes I saw not just fear, but fierce, unyielding loyalty. He was not leaving me. A surge of renewed energy, a raw, primal defiance coursed through me. I was not going to die here. I lunged forward, ignoring the pain, ignoring the approaching drones, ignoring the colossal predator. My hand shot out, grasping Jasper's with a vice-like grip. Just as the drones reached me, just as their chitinous legs scraped against my clothes, just as the colossal intruder's proboscis began to rip through the closing hatch, Jasper pulled. With a powerful, desperate heave, he hauled me forward through the narrowing gap into the escape pod. The hatch slammed shut behind us with a resonant clang that reverberated through the pod, sealing us off from the horrors outside. Darkness, complete absolute darkness, broken only by the faint internal blue light that pulsed gently from the pod's interior. We were safe, trapped, confined, but safe within the small, self-contained vessel. Then a sudden, powerful lurch. The pod vibrated violently, a deep, guttural roar echoing through its hull. We were falling. No, not falling, launching. Through a small, circular viewport, which now pulsed with a kaleidoscope of external light, I saw it. The massive cavern of the escape pod chamber receded rapidly. The colossal intruder shrieked in fury, its enormous body thrashing, its proboscis flailing wildly as the swarm of drones scattered, a furious, chittering tide. We were ejected, propelled away from the facility, away from the horrors of the alien machine. The viewport showed a rapid succession of images. The vast, dark expanse of the outer void, then the fractured, glowing surface of the Sentinel, now a colossal, angry wound in the fabric of reality. The colossal intruder, visible for a split second, was still latched onto it, feeding, its proboscis deeply embedded in the shimmering, cracking rock. Then the true scale of what we had just escaped. The entire alien facility, a colossal, impossible structure of geometric forms and swirling light, shrinking rapidly in the distance, a dark, intricate jewel against the infinite black. It was a massive, sentient entity slowly repairing itself, closing its wounds. Our pod spun, accelerating further, moving at an incredible speed. The stars outside became streaks of light, blurring into a luminous tunnel. We were traveling through space-time, perhaps through a warp, a hyperspace conduit created by the facility itself for emergency egress. Jasper lay beside me, crumpled against the curved wall of the pod, panting, his eyes wide and still filled with a lingering terror, but also a burgeoning sense of relief. We made it," he whispered, his voice shaky, disbelieving. I nodded, unable to speak, my own body still trembling, adrenaline coursing through me. We had defied the odds. We had escaped. The blue light inside the pod remained, a constant, comforting pulse. The hum of its engines was a steady, rhythmic thrum, reassuring in its mechanical precision. The air was cool. We were alive. The thought reverberated through me, a silent, primal scream of triumph that barely registered over the thrumming of the pod's engines. My breath hitched in my throat, a ragged, painful gasp as the adrenaline began its slow, agonizing retreat, leaving behind a profound exhaustion that settled deep into my bones. Beside me, Jasper still lay crumpled, his chest heaving, his face a mask of disbelief and lingering terror. The blue internal light of the pod cast a soft, ethereal glow on his pale skin. "Jasper," I managed, my voice a raw whisper, barely audible over the rush of hyperspace, a sound like a million whispers echoing through a vast, endless tunnel. Are you hurt?" He stirred, slowly pushing himself upright against the curved wall of the pod, wincing as he moved. He ran a trembling hand over his face, then down his arms and legs, as if confirming his own physical existence. Bruised, he choked out, his voice hoarse, equally strained. "Everywhere, but whole, we're whole." His eyes, still wide and haunted, met mine, filled with a question that needed no words. We had just faced the impossible, outrun death, outsmarted a mechanical god, and escaped the maw of a colossal predator. The sheer improbability of it all was overwhelming. The pod hummed around us, a constant, low vibration that was both unnerving and oddly comforting. It was a single, sleek teardrop, barely large enough for the two of us to sit without our knees touching. The interior was minimalist, designed for function over comfort. Smooth, metallic gray walls curved inwards, meeting a central console that glowed with the same soft blue light. There were no visible seats, just contoured depressions in the floor that offered a semblance of stability. A single circular viewport, now a swirling vortex of streaking, colorful light, dominated one end, showcasing our impossible journey through the warp. I felt the lingering phantom pain of the entity's presence in my mind, a dull ache behind my eyes. The mental link, though severed from the core, still pulsed faintly, a residual echo of the vast data I had absorbed. It felt like a part of me, a new, unwelcome organ. "How did you do that, Sarah?" Jasper asked, finally articulating the question that hung heavy in the air between us. He gestured vaguely towards the closed hatch, then towards me. "The pod, it was locked. You unlocked it." I swallowed, my throat dry. "The facility," I began, struggling to find the words to explain the inexplicable. "The core, it downloaded information into me. Schematics, pathways, and then in the archive chamber, when it tried to integrate me, it flooded my mind with everything. I felt it, the locking mechanism, the biometric seal. I just focused. I tried to think like the facility, to replicate the neural pattern it needed. I looked at my hands, still faintly trembling. I don't know, it was a guess, a desperate one. Jasper stared at me, his gaze intense, searching. "You thought like it, you became a part of it." The implication hung between us, chilling in its starkness. Had my mind been irrevocably altered? Was I still me? The blue glow on my skin was gone, but the feeling of being connected, of having absorbed something vast and alien, lingered. "I don't know," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "I just knew we had to get out. It was instinct." He leaned back, resting his head against the curved wall, closing his eyes for a moment. "Instinct, or something more. We've changed, Sarah. This whole damn ordeal, it's done something to us." He was right. We had walked through a living nightmare, touched the mind of an alien god, and faced death countless times. We were not the same people who had been abducted. We were survivors, forged in the crucible of incomprehensible terror. A small panel on the central console, previously dark, flickered to life, glowing with the same soft blue light as the interior. Alien glyphs, shimmering and fluid, appeared on its surface, scrolling rapidly. "What's that?" Jasper asked, his eyes snapping open. I leaned forward, studying the display. The mental link, faint as it was, immediately began to translate, or at least give me an intuitive understanding. Its status reports and destination protocols. My eyes scanned the glyphs, interpreting them as they scrolled. Hull integrity 100%. Life support optimal. Propulsion drive engaged. And then the critical piece of information: destination unspecified, egress points sector 7 gamma, estimated transit time 024718. "Sector 7 gamma," I murmured, a new wave of uncertainty washing over me. I don't know what that means. It's not a human designation. Of course not, Jasper sighed, a weary humor in his voice. Why would it be? What about communication? Can we call anyone? I focused on the panel, trying to locate any communication options. The glyphs shifted, revealing more sub-menus. Interpod communication, offline. External broadcast, offline. Emergency beacon, activated. Signal strength, low. Emergency beacon is on, I reported, a sliver of hope. But signal strength is low, and we can't communicate, not with anyone outside anyway. So we're just being flown to an unknown location, hoping for the best with no way to call for help, Jasper summarized, his voice flat. Basically, I confirmed a bitter taste in my mouth. But we're alive, Jasper, we're out. That's more than I thought possible an hour ago. He nodded, a grim acknowledgement. True, I'll take it, but what happens when we get there, wherever Sector 7 Gamma is? The mental link provided no answer for that. The information it contained was about the facility, its functions, its internal structure. Not external galactic geography or alien politics. We were truly adrift in the unknown. We'll figure it out, I said, trying to infuse my voice with a confidence I didn't quite feel. We always have. A soft whirring sound came from a compartment beneath the console. A small, hexagonal opening slid back, revealing a recessed compartment. Inside, nestled in individual slots, were small, nutrient paste packets and water sachets. Rations, I said, reaching for one. Looks like we won't starve, at least. Jasper's stomach rumbled audibly, a stark reminder of our basic needs. He took a packet, tearing it open and squeezing the thick, gray paste into his mouth with a look of mild disgust. Tastes like ash, but it's food. We ate in silence, the nutrient paste bland and tasteless, but providing a much-needed surge of energy. The water was cool and clean. As we ate, I continued to monitor the console, searching for any other useful information. The timer counted down relentlessly, marking our progress through the unknown. As the hours of transit wore on, the initial shock began to wear off, replaced by a dull ache of anxiety. The relentless swirling colors outside the viewport began to blur into an oppressive monotony, a psychedelic kaleidoscope that threatened to induce a trance-like state. Jasper, exhausted, eventually drifted off to sleep, his breathing deep and even, a testament to the sheer physical and mental drain of our escape. But I couldn't sleep. My mind was still too active, too bombarded by the residual echoes of the facility. I could still see the vast processing chambers, the ghostly bodies, the intricate circuitry of the power conduits. The image of the colossal intruder, its multifaceted eyes and barbed proboscis, was seared into my memory, and the metallic chittering of the swarm still rang in my ears. I looked down at my hands. The scrapes and bruises from our frantic dash through the facility were almost entirely gone, testament to the regenerative corridor. My skin was smooth, unblemished. It was as if my body had been reset, healed to a perfect state. But the mind was a different matter. The terror remained, the knowledge of what we had endured, and the unsettling awareness of the alien presence within me. What would happen when the timer hit 0? What was waiting for us at Sector 7 Gamma? Friend or foe? A safe haven or another trap? The facility, in its cold, calculating logic, had provided an egress. But to what end? Was it truly an escape or merely a relocation? The questions spun in my mind, endless, unanswered. I tried to focus on something else, anything to break the cycle of fear and uncertainty. I looked at Jasper, peaceful in his sleep, his face still etched with the faint lines of stress. He had been so brave, so loyal. He hadn't abandoned me, even when the odds were impossible. Our shared ordeal had forged a bond between us, a silent understanding that transcended words. The remaining transit time ticked down, agonizingly slowly. Every minute felt like an hour. The pod was a sanctuary, a fragile bubble of safety in the vast, hostile cosmos, but it was also a prison, carrying us towards an unknown fate. Finally, with only minutes left on the timer, the swirling colors outside the viewport began to coalesce. The streaking light slowed, resolving into distinct pinpricks of light, stars, millions of them spread across the inky blackness. The deep hum of the propulsion drive began to wind down, a gradual deceleration that pressed us gently back into the curved depressions of the pod. The blue light on the console flickered, then intensified, displaying new glyphs. Hyperspace exit protocol initiated. Atmospheric reentry sequence loading. Gravitational stabilizer engaged. Jasper stirred, groaning softly, his eyes fluttering open. He blinked, disoriented, then saw the viewport. "We're out," he whispered, awe in his voice. "We're in normal space." I nodded, my gaze fixed on the stars. They were beautiful, stark, and utterly silent. Our escape was real. As the pod completed its deceleration, a new image began to form in the viewport. It was a planet. Large, verdant green, swathed in swirling white clouds. It looked remarkably similar to Earth, a vibrant jewel hanging in the void. "A planet," Jasper breathed, hope rekindling in his eyes. Could it be home? My mental link, however, remained silent on the identity of the planet. It was an unknown. The pod began to descend, a gentle, controlled drop towards the planet's atmosphere. The console displayed a new series of glyphs: target atmospheric envelope detected, controlled descent initiating. As we entered the atmosphere, the pod shuddered faintly. The viewport turned orange, then red, as friction heated the outer hull. But the pod systems compensated, the blue light on the console remaining steady. Through the clearing view, as the heat haze subsided, we saw landscapes. Vast, sprawling forests of impossibly tall, crimson trees. Towering mountain ranges, their peaks capped with shimmering turquoise ice. And then, as we descended further, a coastline, a vast, sparkling ocean of deep violet, its waves crashing against shores of iridescent black sand. It was undeniably beautiful, and undeniably alien. "Not Earth," Jasper murmured, a note of disappointment in his voice, but also wonder. "Definitely not Earth." The pod continued its descent, smoothly navigating the alien skies. We passed over strange, bioluminescent flora that pulsed with soft light in the crimson forests. We saw no immediate signs of civilization, no cities, no structures. Then the console flared with a new warning: local atmospheric disturbance detected. Origin, unknown energy signature, adjusting descent trajectory. The pod abruptly altered course, banking sharply to the left. The shift in G-forces pressed us against the walls. Through the viewport, a new sight emerged. It was a structure, or what remained of one. In the middle of a vast, emerald plain stood the skeletal remains of something enormous. Twisted metal, shattered crystalline panels, and deep scorch marks scarred the landscape for miles around. It looked like a colossal ruin, as if something immense had crashed there or been destroyed. And from its heart, a faint, rhythmic pulse of energy emanated, visible as a shimmering distortion in the air. This was the atmospheric disturbance. The pod approached the ruin, slowing its descent as if drawn to it. The console displayed egress point proximity, target designated area. "It's taking us to that," Jasper said, pointing at the ruin, his voice now tinged with apprehension. "The egress point, it's a crash site." My mind raced. Was this a safe zone, a pickup point, or another trap? The facility's logic was inscrutable. The pod finally touched down with a soft hiss, settling gently on the scorched earth near the edge of the ruin. The hum of its engines died, plunging the interior into a profound silence, broken only by our ragged breathing. The blue light on the console remained active, but the glyphs now read, "Egress point reached, awaiting external authorization." "Awaiting external authorization?" Jasper questioned, confusion clouding his face. "What does that mean?" Before I could answer, a new series of glyphs appeared, flashing red. "Warning, unauthorized approach detected. Unknown biological signature. Activating defensive protocols." Suddenly, the pod shuddered. A low, metallic clanking sound came from the exterior. The small viewport at the front retracted, revealing a thick, armored shutter that slammed into place, plunging the pod into near total darkness, save for the blue glow of the console. "What's happening?" Jasper yelled, panic rising in his voice. "Something's approaching," I said, straining my ears, trying to pierce the metallic shell of the pod. The mental link provided no specific images, just a vague sense of an external presence drawing closer. And the pod considers it a threat. A deep guttural roar, unlike anything we had heard before, ripped through the air outside, vibrating through the pod's hull. It was primal, powerful, and filled with a raw, predatory hunger. Then a series of heavy thuds against the pod's exterior. Something massive was pressing against it or trying to climb it. The pod shook violently, its internal lights flickering. Through the console, a new image flickered into existence. It was a crude, monochrome external sensor feed, showing blurry, distorted shapes moving around the pod. They were immense, hulking figures, vaguely humanoid, but covered in thick, dark fur with glowing red eyes that pierced the gloom. They carried crude, sharpened weapons that glinted wickedly. "Creatures," I whispered, horror rising in my throat. "Hostile indigenous life forms. They're trying to get in." "Hostile?" Jasper scoffed, a desperate laugh escaping him. "They sound absolutely furious, and what do they want?" Another tremendous thud against the pod's hatch, followed by a metallic groan. The pod's systems flashed red, hull breach probability high. "They want in," I said, stating the obvious, but the implication was terrifying. We had escaped the alien facility, only to crash land on a planet inhabited by aggressive, powerful creatures who were now attempting to tear apart our only sanctuary. The console displayed new glyphs, defensive turrets activating, lethal force authorized. A mechanical whirring sound came from the pod's exterior, followed by a series of sharp, rapid cracks and high-pitched shrieks from outside. The heavy thudding stopped. A few more cracks, then silence. The sensor feed showed the hulking figures falling, their glowing eyes dimming before the image cleared. The creatures were dead, scattered around the pod. Threat neutralized, the console confirmed, the red warning glyphs reverting to blue. Resuming, awaiting external authorization protocol. We sat in stunned silence, listening to the echoes of the battle. The pod's automated defenses had worked. We were safe for now, but the planet was clearly hostile. "Well," Jasper finally said, his voice shaky, "that was effective." "Too effective," I murmured, a chill running down my spine. The pod had fired without hesitation, without warning. It was a cold, efficient killer, just like the facility that had built it. We waited. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. The quiet hum of the pod systems was the only sound. The awaiting external authorization message remained an inscrutable barrier. What were we waiting for, and who was this external authority? Then the sensor feed on the console flickered, showing a new image. A single figure, small and slender, was approaching the pod. It wasn't one of the hulking, furred creatures. This one was bipedal, with an elegant, almost ethereal silhouette. It glowed faintly, a soft, internal amber light. It held no visible weapons. "New signature detected, authorized entity approaching." The glyphs flashed green. "Authorized," Jasper whispered, leaning forward. "Who is that?" The figure stopped a few meters from the pod, its amber glow illuminating the scorched earth. It raised a hand, and with a soft, almost imperceptible click, the pod's front hatch hissed, then slowly began to retract inwards, revealing the creature. It was slender, humanoid, with long, delicate limbs and a graceful posture. Its skin was smooth, a pearlescent white, and its head was elongated, almost avian, with large, luminous amber eyes that held an unsettling depth of intelligence. It wore no clothes, but its body seemed to shimmer, as if woven from light itself. It was clearly alien, but utterly unlike anything we had encountered within the facility or the monstrous intruder. The creature's gaze swept over us, its luminous eyes assessing. It made no sound, no overt gesture of welcome or threat. It simply observed. My mental link, which had been relatively quiet since we left the facility, now pulsed with a new influx of data. It wasn't a schematic this time, but a sense, an understanding of this being. It was a maintainer. One of the original designers, the architects of the facility, the ones who had built the Sentinel. And it was waiting for us. The hatch was now fully open, revealing a ramp that extended to the scorched ground. Cool, fresh air, smelling faintly of ozone and strange, alien flora wafted into the pod. The awaiting external authorization message on the console now read, "External authorization received. Egress granted." Jasper looked at me, then at the silent, luminous alien. His face was a mixture of fear, wonder, and profound uncertainty. "What do we do?" he whispered. "We go," I said, pushing myself up, my legs still shaky. This was our egress point. This was what the facility had sent us to. Whether it was salvation or another layer of the trap, we had to find out. This is what we were sent here for. I stepped onto the ramp, Jasper close behind me, our shadows stretching long and distorted in the amber light of the alien. The creature tilted its head slightly, its luminous eyes fixed on me as if peering into my very soul. The faint hum of the pod was now behind us, a relic of our escape. We stood on the alien soil, a vast emerald plain stretching out towards the crimson forests under a sky of deep twilight blue dotted with alien constellations. The air was cool and crisp against my skin. The ruin loomed behind the alien, a testament to some ancient, terrible conflict. The creature made a soft, melodious sound, a series of chimes and clicks that seemed to resonate directly in my mind. The mental link provided an immediate translation, a direct infusion of meaning. Welcome, specimens. You have completed the egress protocol. Your presence is required. The specimens, Jasper scoffed, his voice tight. What are we, lab rats? I ignored him, my gaze fixed on the maintainer. Required for what? I projected the thought, hoping the mental link would transmit it. The creature's amber eyes seemed to shimmer, for observation, for evaluation, for the next phase of your integration. My blood ran cold. Integration. The word echoed with the horror of the processing void, the archive, the slow, methodical erasure of individuality. We hadn't escaped. We had merely been relocated. This was another facet of the facility's inscrutable agenda. Next phase, Jasper asked, sensing the shift in my demeanor, though he didn't hear the mental translation. What next phase? The maintainer made another chiming sound. The facility has identified unique neural adaptations in one of you due to prolonged exposure to the core network and subsequent data integration. This adaptation is unprecedented. Its luminous eyes settled on me. You are an anomaly, a prime candidate for direct interface. My heart pounded. Direct interface. It sounded like a more intimate, more complete form of processing, a complete assimilation. No, I said aloud, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. We want to go home. Take us home. The maintainer's head tilted again as if processing an unfamiliar concept. Home is where the collective thrives. Home is where consciousness converges. You are here to become part of a new collective, a new generation of stewards. The stewards, Jasper interjected, stepping forward protectively. We're not stewards of anything, we're humans. The maintainer paid him no mind. Its focus remained entirely on me. Your unique adaptation allows for a more direct, refined understanding of the cosmic tapestry. The sentinel is damaged. The intruder is a growing threat. A new, more resilient interface is required. One that can bridge organic and synthetic thought. One that can guide. It extended a delicate, five-fingered hand, its pearlescent skin shimmering. The mental link pulsed with a powerful, undeniable invitation. An offer to become something more, to understand the universe in a way no human ever had, to wield the power of a living machine, but at what cost? Behind the maintainer, within the skeletal remains of the ruin, the faint, rhythmic pulse of energy intensified, growing brighter. The shimmering distortion in the air resolved, revealing a vast circular aperture in the ground, glowing with the same amber light as the maintainer. It was a portal, a gateway. This way, the maintainer chimed, its hand still outstretched, pointing towards the portal. Into the core of the new collective, your destiny awaits. I looked at Jasper, his face etched with confusion and fear. He couldn't hear the mental invitation, the promise of power, the chilling offer of assimilation. He only saw the strange alien, the ominous portal, and the unwavering demand. Sarah, he said, his voice pleading, don't trust it. But the mental link was compelling. It showed me glimpses of what I could become, a conduit of cosmic knowledge, a guide for a damaged alien civilization, a fusion of human consciousness and alien intellect. It showed me a way to fight the intruder, to understand the sentinel, to perhaps even find a way back home with newfound power. It was a seductive, dangerous path. The maintainer watched, its luminous amber eyes unblinking. The portal pulsed, a beckoning maw of light. I took a deep breath, the scent of the alien world filling my lungs. I was at a crossroads. One path led to unknown, potentially horrifying integration. The other to certain death on a hostile planet or a lifetime of being hunted. I looked at Jasper. His face was a beacon of humanity, of individual will, of resistance. Everything the facility, everything the maintainer sought to erase. Then a new, agonizing thought struck me. If I refused, what would happen to Jasper? Would the maintainer simply discard him, or worse, process him for his biological information just like the Sentinel had? My unique connection had given me a role, a choice, but Jasper had no such leverage. The mental link flared again, providing a chilling clarity. He is secondary, expendable, your choice is paramount. No, he wasn't. I wouldn't abandon him. I looked at the maintainer, then back at the ominous portal. The power it offered, the knowledge it promised, suddenly felt like a heavy burden. But perhaps, just perhaps, it was the only way to protect Jasper, to protect ourselves, to survive. I had to play along, for now. What if I refuse? I projected, my voice steady, though my heart was a frantic drum in my chest. The maintainer's eyes narrowed fractionally, a subtle shift in its luminous gaze. Refusal leads to termination, for both of you. The egress protocol ensures compliance or nullification of uncooperative assets. There it was, the chilling truth. There was no escape, only a choice between two forms of assimilation or immediate death. Jasper, seeing the subtle shift in the alien's posture, the hardening of its gaze, knew we were out of time. He squeezed my arm, his hand trembling. Sarah. I made my decision, not for myself, not for the promise of power, but for Jasper, to buy us time, to find another way. I looked at the maintainer, then at the glowing portal. All right, I said, my voice barely a whisper. We'll go, but he comes with me. He is not expendable. I pointed to Jasper. The maintainer's amber eyes seemed to assess my demand, processing the new variable. His presence is not required for optimal integration, but it is permissible. For a time, it made a soft, high-pitched chime. Follow me. The creature turned, its pearlescent form gliding towards the shimmering portal. Jasper looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. It's the only way, Jasper, I said, my voice low and urgent. We have to go in, but we'll find a way out, I promise. He swallowed hard, his gaze lingering on the ominous portal, then on the vast, alien landscape, as if trying to memorize the last sight of open sky. He nodded, a grim determination setting in. All right, lead the way, anomaly. We walked towards the portal, our footsteps silent on the scorched earth. As we approached, the light intensified, bathing us in a warm, amber glow. It shimmered and rippled like water, but it emitted no heat, no discernible force. It was pure energy, a gateway to an unknown dimension. The maintainer paused at the edge of the portal, waiting for us. Its slender form seemed to ripple slightly in the intense light. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was it. Another journey into the heart of the alien. Another step deeper into the web of their inscrutable plans. I stepped forward into the shimmering light, Jasper right behind me. The portal swallowed us whole, a silent, all-encompassing embrace of amber energy. For a moment, there was nothing but light, a vast, overwhelming brilliance that filled my vision, burning away all sense of form or substance. I felt a profound sense of dislocation, of being stretched and pulled, my very atoms rearranged, then reassembled. It was not painful, but utterly disorienting, a silent scream of the soul. Then, as suddenly as it began, the light receded. We found ourselves in a vast circular chamber, far larger than any we had seen within the Sentinel. The walls were not metal or organic, but pure solidified light, pulsing with a gentle, internal amber glow that mirrored the maintainer's own radiance. The floor was smooth, translucent, revealing a dizzying depth beneath, a swirling vortex of raw, unchanneled energy. And in the center of the chamber, suspended like a colossal jewel, was a sphere. But this was unlike any sphere in the data archive. This one pulsed with a myriad of colors, constantly shifting and flowing, reds, blues, greens, golds, all intermingling in a hypnotic dance. It was vast, easily the size of a small moon, and intricately patterned with glowing glyphs that seemed to writhe and change. This was the core, not the mechanical core of the Sentinel, but a living, biological core, the true heart of the Maintainer Collective, the nexus of their consciousness. And it was singing, a silent song that vibrated not in my ears but directly in my mind. A symphony of alien thought, of interconnected consciousness, of collective will. It was beautiful, terrifying, and overwhelmingly powerful. The Maintainer stood before us, its amber eyes fixed on the colossal sphere. Another two Maintainers, identical to the first, emerged from the walls of solidified light, their forms coalescing silently, their luminous eyes fixed on me. They radiated a profound sense of ancient wisdom, of immense power held in delicate balance. My mental link, already strained, was now bombarded, not with information or directives, but with raw, unfiltered consciousness. I felt the presence of thousands, millions, perhaps billions of minds, all intertwined, all connected to the central sphere, all observing me. It was like being plunged into an ocean of thought, each wave a unique identity, a lifetime of experience, all merging into a single, cohesive entity. Welcome, Conduit, the collective voice resonated in my mind, a chorus of timeless thought, cold and infinitely wise. You stand at the heart of our being. The breach has necessitated a new path, a new connection. You are that path. Jasper stood beside me, his face pale, his eyes darting around the colossal chamber, sensing the immense, unspoken power, though he could not hear the mental chorus. He clutched my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice trembling, "what is this place? What are they saying?" It's their collective," I choked out, my own voice strained, my mind struggling to process the overwhelming influx of alien consciousness. Their core, they want me to become a part of it, a conduit. The Maintainers moved, their pearlescent forms gliding towards the central sphere. As they neared it, they began to glow more intensely, their amber light merging with the shifting colors of the colossal core. The Sentinel is but an extension, the collective voice boomed in my mind, its silent words resonating with absolute authority. A tool for harvesting and refining consciousness. but its external vulnerabilities are too great. The intruder threatens our very existence. A direct, integrated interface is required, one that can navigate the physical and the metaphysical, one that can truly understand and therefore truly control. I looked at the colossal sphere, its colors swirling, its silent song filling my mind. Control. They wanted to control the sentinel, to fight the intruder through me. They wanted to merge my human consciousness with its unique adaptations with their vast collective. One of the maintainers, now closer to the core, extended its hand towards the pulsing sphere. As its fingers brushed the surface, the core's light intensified dramatically, and a single, thin filament of pure, shimmering light detached from the sphere, extending outwards. It was heading for me. Prepare for integration, conduit, the collective voice resonated. Your journey begins now. Jasper saw the filament of light, saw it stretching towards me, and his eyes widened in horror. "Sarah, no," he yelled, instinctively pulling me back, trying to shield me. But it was too late. The filament of light, unerring in its trajectory, bypassed Jasper completely, reaching out and gently touching my forehead. A blinding flash of pure white light erupted around me, emanating from my very being. I felt a sensation of infinite expansion, of my consciousness reaching out, merging, becoming one with the vast, ancient, silent song of the collective. My human thoughts, my fears, my memories, my very identity began to fragment, to scatter, to dissolve into the overwhelming tide of alien awareness. I was no longer Sarah. I was a part of something vaster, something infinite. I was a conduit, a bridge, a fragment of their universal consciousness. Jasper's frantic cry, his desperate pull, became a distant echo, a fading memory as my individual self began to unravel, to be absorbed. The chamber, the maintainers, the colossal core, all dissolved into a single, overwhelming sensation of light and sound and thought. My mind raced through millennia of alien history, saw the birth of stars, the rise and fall of civilizations, the slow, methodical growth of the collective. I understood their purpose, their cold, dispassionate quest for knowledge, their unending hunger for consciousness. I felt the immense, terrifying power of the Sentinel, not as a machine, but as a living extension of this very core. I felt the intruder, a discordant note in the collective symphony, a brutal, primal force of chaos. And I felt myself, or what remained of me, merging, flowing, adapting. Then a flicker, a spark, a tiny, defiant ember of my own individual will deep within the overwhelming tide of the collective. A memory, Jasper's face, his desperate cry, his loyalty. No, I would not be erased, not entirely. With a superhuman effort fueled by that single burning ember of individuality, I pushed back. I fought against the tide, against the overwhelming pull of the collective. I latched onto the idea of Sarah, of me, of us. It was like trying to stop a tsunami with a single hand. But the mental link, the connection I had forged with the Sentinel had prepared me. I had absorbed its logic, its data, its very essence. And now that knowledge became a weapon. I seized upon the echoes of the facility's vast, impersonal logic, the cold, calculating precision of its programming, and twisted it. I used the very structure of its thought to build a mental barricade, a wall of pure, unyielding computation around the last bastion of myself. It was a desperate gamble, a chaotic fusion of human will and alien machinery, but it was my only chance. The collective recoiled. a ripple of surprised thought echoing through my besieged mind. It was momentary, a flicker of unexpected resistance against an inexorable tide, but it was enough. The blinding white light around me dimmed, receding slightly, as if the sheer force of the collective's integration had faltered, momentarily caught off guard by the paradox of a biological entity using its own logic against it. My individual consciousness, bruised but not broken, snapped back into focus. I was still Sarah, but I was also more. A torrent of alien data, a kaleidoscope of cosmic understanding, continued to flood my mind, but it no longer threatened to dissolve me. Instead, it flowed through me, an intricate river of information that I could now channel, interpret, and terrifyingly, even manipulate. The filament of light, still connected to my forehead, pulsed with increased intensity, a conduit not just to the collective, but from it. I felt the universe expand within me, a vast, silent ocean of knowledge unfurling, revealing secrets beyond human comprehension. The true nature of the Sentinel, not merely a ship or a facility, but a vast, living tapestry of interconnected systems, each processing and refining consciousness, became startlingly clear. The intruder, a ravenous, chaotic force that sought to disrupt this intricate harmony, was an enemy not just to the maintainers, but to the very fabric of existence they understood. Jasper's gasp, sharp and sudden, pierced the overwhelming internal chorus. "Sarah, your eyes." I blinked, my vision now enhanced, able to perceive layers of reality previously invisible. The light-infused chamber, the translucent floor, the colossal core, all shimmered with new, intricate energy patterns. I saw the network of thought flowing between the three maintainers, their pearlescent forms now radiating not just amber, but also faint, internal blues and greens, reflecting the complex interplay of their collective minds. I instinctively reached up, touching my face. My fingers felt the smooth skin around my eyes, but in my new, heightened perception, I could feel the subtle shift, the faint hum of energy beneath the surface. I saw my reflection, a translucent, shimmering ghost in the solidified light of the chamber walls. My eyes, once human brown, now glowed with an internal, amber light mirroring the maintainer's own. The pupils seemed to expand and contract, taking in far more than before, processing an incredible amount of visual data at once. The collective voice, though still vast and powerful, no longer threatened to erase me. It was now a conversation, albeit one-sided. Unprecedented, it resonated in my mind, a chorus of cold, analytical thought. The biological anomaly has achieved partial integration without full dissolution of individual consciousness. The bridge is stronger than anticipated. One of the maintainers, the one closest to me, glided forward, its elongated head tilting, its luminous amber eyes fixing on mine. It emitted a series of rapid, complex chimes, a silent query that my newly integrated mind instantly understood. How did you resist? How do you retain self within the flow? I didn't speak aloud. I responded directly, a cascade of thought projected through the filament, an echo of